Me and my family went on a short road trip a number of years ago. The time of this event was actually in the 1980s, so a good while before you had decent cell phones. We also didn't really have much in the way of satellite navigation back then, so it meant you basically had to rely on maps, and that wasn't always so easy. It was my dad, my brother, and I on this particular journey, and me and my brother were acting as key navigators for my father. Now, to say that didn't go well would be an understatement because we ended up miles and miles away from where we're supposed to be, and we basically ended up changing the place that we were going to camp at just to make things easier. My dad wasn't that bothered though, and we settle into the area that we can park and camp. We did originally plan on setting up our tents, but it was quite late and we just settled down. We're figuring out what we need to do, and my dad suggests that we still make it to the other place because it was close to a beautiful national park and there was going to be lots we could see. We all agree with this and we settle in for the night. Nothing much happened, I just had a feeling that I couldn't sleep easily. When we woke up, someone who was dressed in a hat come over to us. It was clearly a park ranger who said something pretty weird to us. He said, "Hey, I'm gonna have to kick you out of here." We said, "Oh, sorry, we didn't realize this was somewhere we couldn't park or stay." And he said, "No, just you're not supposed to be here." Something about this person seemed really odd, and my dad gave him a funny look and quickly ushered us to get our things ready and drive away. Now, on the drive back, me and my brother kept asking my dad what was wrong and why he looked a bit unsettled, and he then said that there aren't supposed to be any park rangers out here. I thought that was pretty bizarre, but I thought, maybe they've just expanded somewhere and we didn't realize it. I was pretty paranoid because, I don't know, I was young, but my dad seemed worse than me, and that was a bit worrying because my dad's a pretty strong person and I've never really seen him worry much before. Eventually though, we start making our way to where we're actually supposed to be originally. I don't know, it was kind of a good thing that we got there because I didn't want to spend another night in that place. You know when you feel like somebody's just going to linger around for a stupidly long time for no reason? Yeah, I kind of had the feeling that that was going to happen again. Now, to say this trip was eventful would be an understatement, as you're about to hear. Now, we eventually get to this place and my god, it's beautiful. I've seen some pretty good things in my time, but not much can compare to how beautiful this place was and my dad took us. I was really grateful for it and I found it a really nice adventure to have. I thought it was really funny what had happened earlier. My dad actually settled up a lot and we started to feel pretty good. So eventually we set up our tent and get ready to sleep. That was when it happened. We hear some screaming and it was really creepy. I don't know whether there was some kind of animals getting into some big fight outside, but that's what it sounded like. Until eventually, it sounds just like there was some kind of human intervention. My dad says to wait here as he goes outside the tent, and I can hear him talking to someone. The screaming sounds have stopped, and I think this is pretty bizarre, because my god, did it sound like there was all hellfire earlier, so what happened? Me and my brother slowly emerged. I remembered it was very cold outside, and my dad was saying to someone, "No, just go away," and actually swearing. That's when I realised it was the same ranger that we had seen before. How on God's green earth had this person managed to get to the exact same spot as us again? It's not possible, I said to my brother and thought that maybe it was someone who just looked very similar, but this guy sounded exactly the same. Eventually this guy scurried off and my dad said something about being armed to him, and that seemed to make this person change their tone. They just slowly disappear into the trees like they weren't there before. Another weird thing that I noticed is that this person looks very tired and sweaty, almost like they've been in some kind of big fight, but with who? With what? That we just didn't know. Now, discussing it the next morning wasn't really an option because my dad was really focused in. From early in the morning, he'd gone round with his knife and was just patrolling the perimeter like he was looking for something. Me and my brother then say, "Dad, what are you doing?" And he just shakes his head and says, "No, something's just off with that guy and I don't know why. I just can't stop thinking about it." We eventually all agree that we should move our campsite because we don't want to have our trip ruined by some weirdo, but it was really looking that way. So we now go a bit deeper into the woods. We eventually find another really safe place to go, and it's pretty cool. It's kind of up on a hill and you have a good vantage point here, so we're feeling a lot safer now, and we go about our day like usual. We've set up the tent and are getting ready for this night's sleep too. We're not too far from the end of our trip now, and we were actually enjoying it. However, this one particular night my dad just would not fall asleep. Eventually me and my brother do though, and we wake up the next morning and my dad looks like he hasn't had any sleep at all. I say, "Dad, what's wrong?" And he says, "Well, nothing." We then keep on pressing him to find out what had happened, and again he doesn't say anything at first, until eventually he finally lets off on what happened. Apparently, all night he was sure that he could see the silhouette of someone who appeared to be dressed just like a park ranger, and it scared my dad a lot. We decide that we're going to man out the last night because again we're armed and we're at quite a good point here, but something just felt off about this person. So anyway, what happens? We go to fall asleep the next day and here we are again. Blood-curdling screams that you cannot seem to get away from, and it's really annoying because clearly this is some kind of animal out here and it will not stop making these weird sounds. But then again, we didn't really consider the fact that maybe, just maybe, this was people going at it and maybe trying to kill each other. Well, at least that's what my dad said. Every time we raised the alarm, he said, no, don't worry, just go to sleep. If anyone comes, I'll get them with my knife. Now, that reassured us a lot and we fall asleep again. Now, everything's as it should be the next morning, and we get our things together and decide to go. However, while leaving, we do realise something odd. There's blood, and a lot of it. It's only about a 4-minute walk from our tent, but it almost looks like somebody's had a massive sword fight. No, multiple people have had a big sword fight like back in the day. But where are the bodies? The amount of blood on the floor is honestly inhuman, and there must have been at least 1 or 2 more bodies. But nobody's around, and the smell, it smelt so bad. Honestly, like something we've never smelt before. And you can imagine we didn't stick around too long for this. My dad intelligently mentions that if this is what he thinks it is, then we don't want to put our forensics there. Forensics wasn't very advanced back then, but we weren't silly and keep it moving. My dad then goes over to the station to report what's happened, and that's when we see it. All kinds of police cars everywhere, and some law enforcement's coming to approach us. They tell us not to move and we don't, and my dad goes over to talk to them. I don't know exactly what he said, but they actually come and cuff him and us, and we have to go in to give some statements. They don't let on to exactly what's happened, but they just ask exactly why we're out there and what we're doing. Again, I didn't realise this until afterwards, but they actually interviewed all of us independently to make sure that our stories matched up. They asked for the exact spot where we camped, and my dad eventually leads them over there. Me and my brother have to stay with the police, who will not tell us what happened. Eventually though, after persisting, one of them opens up and says, "You know, they found a few bodies out there?" Me and my brother look at each other, terrified now. It was almost like we didn't want to accept that we'd just walked through a crime scene, but that was exactly what had happened. Apparently, there were reports of somebody imitating some kind of law enforcement or something, following people around, then getting them in the night. And apparently this wasn't the first time that it had happened out here. Now my dad comes back after a while and says, "Come on, let's go." None of us said a word to each other, as the police open up their tape and let us through. Now the drive back was pretty much entirely in silence until we pull up on the driveway, and my dad looks me and my brother dead in the eyes and tells us, "Hey, you don't tell anyone about what happened, alright? Especially not your mother. And we both agree with this, and that's that. So after doing some research later, it turns out that somebody would dress up like a police or park ranger and just try and look official in order to follow people around, and this person actually ended up murdering almost 4 people. It turned out we were camping in basically the exact spot where one of the murders took place, and there's a pretty strong chance that he was actually following us, but we were the lucky ones who got away. It still terrifies me. I mean, I don't think I'll ever get over this. In December of 2005, me and a few high school friends were back home from our respective universities. We were juniors at the time and started a tradition winter break of freshman year to visit random state parks / smaller towns and explore them, along with the occasional mischief that we would end up getting ourselves into. During these times, one-night trips, the 3 of us would all sleep in the back of my Tahoe on a large mattress pad. This kept us safe from the elements and set my paranoid mind at ease should we be subject to any foul play. We decided this year to go to the Davy Crockett National Forest area. This area has many places that are extremely rural and desolate, which was exciting because we had previously found some interesting things in abandoned structures on our previous excursions. I had used up the rest of my university printing credits to print detailed MapQuest pages for us to navigate while we were visiting. The drive was roughly 2 hours from our hometown, Conroe. We decided to start the trip off in Lufkin, just east of the National Forest, to eat dinner and get a few things from Walmart. After dinner, we decided to mess around and get into our shenanigans. A few hours later, we found ourselves in Crockett, Texas, about an hour west of Lufkin. We planned on staying in a campground about halfway between the 2 cities, so had a lot of flexibility when it came time. We explored random roads and went in a few abandoned buildings before getting bored and wanting to go somewhere else. By this time, it was 12:30 AM, and at this point, I needed to get an energy boost. So, we decided to stop at a gas station in Kennard, Texas, which was about 30 minutes east of Crockett. I go inside and buy a few snacks, energy drinks, and a few cans of Skull to give us some fuel for the rest of the night, which is giving me a nice buzz. We decide to go a little more adventurous and venture down FM 357 south of Kennard. We come across a few Forest Service roads that veered off into rural residential roads and other country roads. I pull off on the side of the road to check the MapQuest and match the cross streets we're on at any given moment, with my 2 friends assisting the navigation. After getting back onto the road, I notice it's 1:30 AM and we all joke about how miraculously that we're still up. I decide to head down to the next service road we come across. This is where things start to get pretty weird, and where parts of my memory are erased due to sheer adrenaline that I had at the time. After driving down a few more service roads and taking random turns, we go to a road that is much more narrow compared to the others. By this time, I get incredibly frustrated. I mean, it's almost 2:15 AM, and I don't want to stumble into someone's front yard in a rural area in the middle of the night. I decide to slow down, and suddenly, I noticed a faint light in the distance. Great, just great, I think. I thought about the chance of spooking some random soul awake, but about 30 seconds later, I can tell that these are headlights, but they suddenly disappeared. I thought somebody may have turned up ahead, but I was very wrong. About 10 to 15 seconds later, I see what appeared to be a brand new Chevy Suburban. The second I put my high beams on, its light turned on and 3 men dressed in suits jump out and sprint down the road past my car. It was almost like they were lifeless and didn't even notice me. As they're running past me, the Suburban suddenly shifts into reverse and conducts the fastest reverse maneuver I've ever seen. At this point, I unholster my G26 and tell my friend to grab my AR. We're all terrified and have no clue what we're about to come upon. As we drove forward, mind you, these were the days where cell phone coverage was literally non-existent in many areas of the state, so we had no way to call for help if anything happened. As we reached the end of the road, we come upon FM 357, the same road we originated from. But how is this possible, I thought. It felt like we're just venturing further and further away from the road, and we passed a US Forest Service fire station again on the way out like we had on the way in. I've recently checked Google Maps for any US Forest Service fire station off of FM 357 and can't find any current or past historical data for that. The county tax assessor does not have any listings either. We got back on the FM 357 and decided to book it downtown Crockett, as we did not feel comfortable with sleeping in a campsite after what just happened. I have since made sure to never venture down any unknown roads whatsoever, without at least referencing the GPS or map. I'm still processing that short but unsettling event. Where did those men come from? Why were they in suits in the middle of the forest, and where did the black Suburban go? Me and my friends actually still occasionally talk about the incident, and no one can come up with an explanation for what happened. The thing that bothers me is that I cannot find any evidence of this road that we're on. Google Earth doesn't have a satellite or any kind of image which lines up with the one that we're on, so this one and truly deepens the mystery of it all. So, this happened in 1989. I was with my boyfriend Eddie, his best friend, my older sister Angie, and about 6 other people. We'd spent the entire day mudding in the Royal Palm mudflats in Royal Palm Beach, Florida, aka the part of the Palm Beach County. I grew up in West Palm Beach. I had never seen anything like this before. After mudding all day, we decided to call it a night and leave. Almost everybody was gone by then, so we all piled into Eddie's truck and left. Eddie saw a small mud hole and drove through it, and we got stuck. The small hole was relatively deceptive. When I say we got stuck, I mean stuck for hours. I was pregnant with my first, so I was steering as the other 9 are pushing. The truck didn't budge. We had no choice but to wait until the morning for someone to come and tow us, as we're now completely stuck. It's about 5 AM. We decide we should just relax and try to sleep until someone come through. Eddie, I, and his best friends are in front. My sister and other 6, who we are still friends to this day, pile into the back and start to settle down. We were still making noise when I heard a sound. It was a low grumble. I knew immediately that it was some kind of animal. I tell everyone to hush and listen. Then, we all heard it, and it was getting louder and louder and more aggressive sounding now. Eddie has a KC light in his back seat, so he popped it out and lit up the night. That's when our world changed. 10 of us all see something ducking down and moving. Everyone was freaking out because it was clearly there. But what was it? Then it got annoyed, and this thing stood up and let out a roar that I can still remember 31 years later. It leapt through the large brush that it was hiding behind, coming straight towards us, and you can literally feel the shake with every footstep it took. It was 8 to 9 feet tall and broad. It looked like an extremely large man with hair, not fur. It had hair and lots of it. The KC lit it up, and you could see it clumping on the hair. The smell was rotten and sour, and being pregnant, I was extremely sensitive to smell, so it was bad. We had spent hours We're talking 5+ hours trying to push this truck out. They say adrenaline gives you super strength, and they're right. Eddie turned on his truck and starts pushing on the door frame. His bestie leapt out of his side and did the same. My sister and the others let out screams as they piled out, and then all you hear is this thing running and roaring. Everybody else was dead silent as they put everything they needed back and start pushing. With a sucking pop, that's all I can describe it as, we're out and we're throwing ourselves into the back as Eddie and his bestie just floor it. This is woods with tight turns, and we literally flew around those. It felt like the devil himself was after us. After we got out and onto the main road, we headed for a gas station to calm down and call our families. When we got there, we all got out, sat with our backs to the wall, and that was it. We never said a word to each other, just sitting there in silence. I think we were too raw, scared and in complete shock over what had happened. This was law. This wasn't real, so why did it exist? Because it was there. Anyway, after we called our parents and went home, one by one being dropped off, not a word was spoken. My sister and I did not discuss it until about 5 years ago, and we finally opened up about it and to others. It's kind of burned into my memory, and I don't know what it is, but it looked just like a Bigfoot. I was going on a road trip with my brother. I hadn't done so before, and we were both very excited to be doing so. We were going to drive across a few different states, and for that I was very excited. The destination was eventually getting to Canada, and that was really the highlight of the trip. We had such a good time when we eventually make it there, but however, during the trip there was one particular event that I don't think I'm ever going to forget. Now let me set the scene. We've been driving for quite a long time, and we didn't come across anywhere to fill up on gas. We also needed to get some more food and thing. I mean, we had enough of, as you say, proper food, but we wanted to get more snacks and stuff, and we're both getting a little bit tired. Now both of us are pretty good drivers, and we didn't have an issue driving even if we're a little sleepy, but as you know, that can be quite dangerous. So we eventually find a gas station that looks pretty good, and we pull over there. We fill up on some gas and we go inside the store and pay for the gas. We also look around and start getting some snacks and things, and I don't know why, the guy at the counter just felt pretty weird. He seemed nice enough at first, but for some reason, as soon as he heard we're out of town, he kind of changed and just stared at us. It was almost like it wasn't a real person and it was some kind of NPC put there. I don't know how to describe it, but the whole thing just felt a bit surreal. We eventually get the snacks as well and leave and tell him to keep the change, thinking maybe that'll make him more happy, but he literally doesn't react at all. We eventually make it back out and my brother says, "Oh, I really need to use a bathroom," and quickly heads back. I say that I'm gonna wait, and he goes in the store, and this is what he tells me. Apparently the guy was staring at him the whole time back in and didn't say hello or anything when he re-entered. He said that he really needed to use a bathroom, and the guy said he'd show him, and apparently he led him to some really dodgy back area, and it looked like he was going to be trapped, and he said, "Yeah, the light's next to the toilet, you'll find it," and went and closed the door. My brother said that he just stood there completely bewildered and confused about what had happened, and he knew he wasn't going to go there. He felt like he was being set up. What's worst is he can quietly hear the door being locked behind him. Rather than panicking, my brother rather smartly went through an open window and come back to me. He quickly gets in and says, "Hey, let's just get driving." Now, we probably only went about a minute further down the road before the sky lights up a bit brighter. And then, a few seconds later, we're hit with a very loud explosion sound, and it makes me almost crash into a tree. We both look at each other confused as to what's happening, and honestly we thought that there was some kind of foreign force invading our country. After a number of minutes we managed to settle down and realise that this isn't the case. Now we decide that we're going to slowly head back and see what happened, and we're hit with how dark it is. We didn't have to turn around for long before we can see the burning embers where the gas station was. Thinking that guy's just blew himself to pieces in some kind of accident, we frantically call for the cops. We pull over and get out and decide that we need to go and see if he's okay, and that's when we see him. We can see the silhouette of him standing, staring into the flames about 30 meters ahead of us. We both looked at each other and slowly make it back to the car and start driving. We drove for another good 5 hours before eventually stopping, and we don't know what to make of it. Even to this day, we don't know whether that guy was setting up to kill my brother for whatever reason, but I just thank God that he managed to get out in one piece. So the first incident I didn't think much about because it's last April Fool's Day when my husband and I were driving home from a friend's ranch. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a flash of white as our lights illuminated something by the side of the road in an adjoining field. It looks to be a stark white naked man, but he was running with his hands down like he's an animal and going very fast and parallel to our car in the opposite direction. We both freaked out as hell, but think it's probably an April Fool's joke. We're in the dead center of rural Montana. People get bored and do stupid things. Halloween gets crazy here, so we think it's a prank. Then, tonight happened. I went down the road to where the mailboxes from our street are. It's that rural road delivery setup where you have about 20 mailboxes at the end of the long country road. It's about 200 yards from our house and the moon's out, so I figure I'll walk over to check the mail to go and see if my husband's picked it up. When I get there, I find a neighbour not too far from our door heading out the same way on a walk. So we start talking and she accompanies me to the mailboxes. I take a peek into the box. Nothing. We continue chatting for a few minutes when there's suddenly barking from several of the neighbourhood dogs across from us. One at a time, they begin furiously snarling and barking, a few even howling. My neighbour mentions that there must be coyotes roaming again. Happens all the time. Nothing to worry about. Then suddenly, one of the dogs begins howling in pain. We both look at each other, thinking the same. Time to get the hell out of there. We start walking a bit briskly when she turns to glance over her shoulder for a second time and stops. I turned around and see it as well. It looks like a rather skinny-ish but stone white man, not on his feet but on all fours like an animal, no hair that I can see. The light from my phone got in his eyes for a second more, and it shines back like a cat. There was blood down the front of his jaws, and it all happens in maybe 2 or 3 seconds, so very quick. He then literally bolts after us as we run. My neighbour doesn't chain or fence in her dogs as we're animal lovers, and she likes having the extra protection of them wandering as well. So she starts yelling the dog's name and he comes running out from his spot between our houses. He must have smelled this thing or heard it coming because he made an immediate beeline past us, growling like crazy. We reached my husband's working shed, so we hid in there and lock the doors and wait for the cops. All we can do is hide and wait in the shed while she told the cops to come out, hearing the dog barking and attacking whatever that thing was. After a couple of minutes, she's off the phone and we're hiding behind boxes of stuff away from the window. I don't know how long we're there, but before she whispered that the dog isn't barking anymore, and suddenly they're not making any sounds. After a few moments we heard crunching outside. Something starts scratching slow and hard against the front door and part of the wall next to it. I'm not too proud to admit that I weighed myself a little bit, and I throw my hands over my mouth to stop screaming. She was staring at the door, not moving, so I know I wasn't overreacting or anything. It seemed like forever, but eventually, we saw the lights from the cops coming up the long road and the scratching stops. Whatever it was ran off because we heard the noise of leaves crunching hard and fast away from the door. She was brave and gets the guts to peek out the window, and the cops are close now. When they got near us, we ran to the cop cars and told them we saw a kind of man who chased us. She pointed out the direction that he had gone in and ran back, mentioning that the sounds of the dogs are in the opposite neighborhood and away from the mailbox. She said her dog come without us even calling, and we hid in the sheds. The cop takes our statements and said that somebody else had called a few minutes before, and that there was a wolf or something in her backyard that just killed the chickens, and their dog and the neighbour down had actually saw the thing too. The other cops found my neighbour's dog lying on the ground with what appears to be deep claw marks, having trouble breathing. As he's lying there, he gets bundled up, and the vet comes to pick him up, and he mentions how it looks like a bear's attacked. So I'll give a description of both of what the neighbour down from the owner of the dead dog described and what we saw. The neighbour said it looked like a stark white naked man, tall, wearing the skin of a bear or bison, brown furred and head attached, blood coming from the mouth and around the chest, very long arms. She caught him crouching over the dog, turns on the back porch light, and he ran off. What we saw was a pale man without hair, with long arms, eyes that glows like a cat, very quick, reddish glow, animal looking. When he started running after us, it wasn't awkward like a guy trying to run on his hands and feet. It looked like a person now, but it wasn't. This isn't the first time this kind of thing happened. It's not the first time I've heard of odd things. Montana's one of them places where so many weird and unexplainable things happen. But it's not the first time something odd's come after me in the dark. It's been a couple of hours and I'm still shaking. If that was me, I'd make the skinwalker bleed if it touched my dog. I would literally fight to the death over my dog. Skinwalker would be running from me. So for my backstory, my boyfriend and I had just bought our first house in June on a lake about half an hour northeast of Seattle, WA. Aside from the lake community we're part of, there really isn't a large range of population around here. We're in between a few larger towns, but they're all about a 20-minute drive from where we live. Our house is backed right up against a cascade of mountains. We're pretty much the last bit of population before the mountains begin. About 30 yards from our driveway is a dead-end road that turns off the main lake road and goes back into the woods for a few miles. There's a few gated Forest Service / logging roads that branch off from this. Boyfriend and I ride our dirt bikes up these roads, and they themselves go on for miles. But there really aren't any other houses in the area except for a few that are all on the main road. Before taking the dirt bikes up to it, I love dirt bikes, I had been walking up this road a few times exploring the area, and it always felt a little odd to me. My boyfriend said things like, "This is creepy even in daylight." It totally could have been that it was just very wooded in most spots and therefore shaded. The lack of houses made it odd, but I stopped walking up this road for this reason. When we moved in, I was dog sitting my friend's pit bull Bella. She's about 70 pounds and was a totally fearless brat. Now she's kind of aggressive with other dogs, and even with some people. I would walk her up to the end of the road, and I'd always feel okay because there were no cars or houses around. So one day we were about 2 miles up the main road, and had come down a small hill onto a flat, treeless area where there was no old abandoned barn and a large field that cut through the road. There was tall grass on either sides of the road. When we got to the area, Bella's tail went down and she kept her head really low. She also started to look around and back behind us, acting nervous, which is really odd for her. As we're coming around a turn, about 100 yards in front of us is a logging road that went off the road straight up a hill. It had a large gate just at the bottom of it to keep vehicles out. My boyfriend and I have to put our dirt bikes under this gate before riding up the trails, so it's pretty tall. The top of the bar of the gate comes to my chest and I'm 5'5". What I saw still scares me to think about. Standing right in front of the gate is a huge black dog. It was standing broadside with its head low. I'm almost positive it's looking towards us, because I can't make out a snout or ears. I can't see a tail either, but it may have been lowered behind its legs. The shoulder of the thing was higher than the top of the gate. It was blocking part of the view. I stopped instantly and held Bella's harness so she couldn't advance forward and catch sight of it, and this dog's aggressive. I look at this thing for probably 2 seconds before running back and getting back to the main road because I heard this thing growl. I'm not kidding you. 100 yards away from it, I hear this thing, almost hissing. I'm totally terrified, so's Bella now, which is worrying. She's not even seen it. It was a long 2 miles back and I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder, and Bella's also freaking out the whole time. The growling, massive black dog wasn't the only thing I'm terrified of. I have this also feeling of dread that I can't get away from. Now I saw it, and it was overwhelming, and I've never felt fear like it before. Even while typing this, I'm shaking. I don't even feel safe when I'm home alone anymore. My boyfriend's 100% sure I saw a 6-foot black bear, but I'm certain it wasn't, as I grew up in rural Pennsylvania and have never seen black bears. Now this thing had long skinny legs and a deep curved rib cage. It's similar to a Doberman. Now, wolves don't live in this area. Even if they did, this would have been an abnormally large skinny wolf. I'm pretty sure what I come across is actually a skinwalker. After a stressful day at work, I gone over to my friend's apartment to shoot the breeze, eat some food and play a few games on my friend's PlayStation 4. It was getting late and I had to be up fairly early the next day. My friend walked out to the parking lot with me. Now there's no one else in the parking lot, just us two. As I'm unlocking my car, a dog walked out from the side of a nearby building about 25 feet away. It came fully into view and stops to look at us. It was a little bit bigger than a standard Great Dane. It's an all-black dog with long hair that appeared to be falling out in clumps. It has long ears and a scraggly tail. I remember making eye contact with it. It had dark maroon coloured eyes, and in the moment we locked eyes, it appears almost to smile at us. Instead of a dog's lips going up and back, they go slightly sideways, and I see white teeth like a human almost. I recall suddenly getting a feeling of dread and fear. It felt like something disguised as a dog pretending to be one, but it's not. I'm certain of it. The energy coming off this thing doesn't feel right either. I really don't know how to describe it. It turned around and starts slowly limping back to the corner it's come from. My hair goes up. It turned around and slowly starts staring at us before heading off. It seemed to have most of its weight on its front feet, walking like a hunchback. The way it was limping, I noticed its rear left foot is wrapped up in a blue gauze, and the foot appears very odd. The heel was parallel to the ground actually. I'm unsure if my friend saw exactly what I saw, but she suddenly said, "It's leaving, let's follow it," and she ran after the damn thing. And it disappeared right around the corner. I remembered being scared for my friend, so I sprint after her. Around the corner with my friend, looking around confused. The dog? It's gone. At the rate it was walking and limping, it couldn't have got anywhere. The air was suddenly cold. even for South Texas in January. My teeth were chattering. My friend told me to go quickly back to her apartment, lock the door and stay inside. I warned her that this isn't a dog. I text her when I'd gone home. Once at the safety of home, I text my friend and say that I hope this is the end of it. But even as I'm sitting there in bed, my heart is racing. It doesn't help that around 12 AM, there was low whistling right outside my window. My neighbour's house isn't too far from mine, but they're good people and there's no logical reason for them to be that close to my window at night whistling. I didn't make any indication that I was aware of the whistling. It's not even musical, just like somebody trying to get their attention. Eventually, the whistling stops and I hear nothing else. I have a lot of trouble sleeping. I've never seen or experienced anything like this. To the best of my knowledge, it could be a skinwalker. I'm going to try my best to describe this in a cohesive manner. It's been a few years and a lot of stuff happened this night, but it's forever in my memory and haunting. If anyone has an idea what it is, I'd love to hear it. So in July of 2014, I'd been dating my now ex-boyfriend for a couple of months and decided to move in with him. I'm going to change names just for the sake of this. We'll call him Tom. So Tom lives on the Cattaraugus Indian Reservation in western New York. He's 100% Seneca, and his family has properties on reservation land. I'm only 25% Seneca, and because my mum is white, I'm not an enrolled member. So I never grew up going to Longhouse or living on the res because the majority of families are white Catholics. He lives on a side of the major road going through the res called Route 438. One night, we get in a big argument and I'm annoyed and go away for a bit. Living with him full time doesn't offer me a break, so I'm pretty annoyed. What's worse is I don't have a car at the time, so I decide at 2 AM that I'm gonna walk. Anger clouds my judgment, and I had to leave. He kept saying to me to stay and blocks the door, and picked me up and brought me back. He's adamant, but so am I. He was concerned I'd go into weirdos cruising around. I was so angry that I didn't care, and I also grown up walking the woods at night, so never really had an issue. So I walk out the door and up the driveway and start heading down this road. It's pitch black with brush on both sides, but there's a few trailers his aunts and uncles owned. As I get closer to the stop sign where his road ends and connects to Route 438, I see a light heading towards me. I get freaked out and realise it's a person heading towards me. Now it's not really uncommon for people to be walking by the res at night, but as we got closer, I debate turning back. But I was mad and kept going. Suddenly the person says, my name, then, what the hell? I recognise the voice as Tom's cousin that lives in the trailer behind us. I was so relieved that it was him and not a stranger. We stopped to talk and he told me that he's walking home from a party. I told him me and Tom fought and I was heading into town to stay with friends. He told me I was crazy and it's not safe for girls to walk around at night and said I could stay at his father's trailer for the night. Sounds more logical than walking 9 miles alone. When he headed back towards the end of the road, we get to the trailers and pass a clearing in the brush where the old driveway was. I look into the clearing and I can't really explain what I saw. It was so dark, but I could see whatever this was. It's much darker than the environment around it. It was completely black, to the shape of a skinny but massive human-like shape. It was crouched so its knees were in front of its stomach, but its arms are so long. I was shaking writing this and I can't explain what it appeared to be. I saw it quickly and then looked straight ahead. 3 seconds later, Tom's cousin says, "Did you see that?" And I said yeah, and we instantly start sprinting as fast as possible. He was faster and started yelling, "Just go." We got into his trailer and sat in silence. I think maybe we both saw it and didn't know for sure until we saw each other. The walk felt like it took an eternity. I felt this horrible feeling of being watched. Its arms were massive. They're so long that even crouched or seated, with its knees bent, it's able to keep its back upright and not back like it's supposed to do. It's at least 7 feet tall. I have no idea what it could have been, and I have no experience of anything like it. And my ex would never talk about it, saying I was just seeing things, but his cousin saw it too. A few months ago, my roommates and I are out taking a drive trying to find a fun place to visit. I'll call them S and J for privacy's sake. S was driving and told us about a playground in Skelly that she used to go with a friend, so we decided to check it out. The playground wasn't very special, but it was interesting because it was half old playground equipment that you could tell someone hadn't used in years, and half new equipment. While we're enjoying time over there, I start hearing whispering from the near side of the playground, which didn't freak me out because I've heard them since I was a child. But I called out to Jay and she and I walked over there. By the time S joined us, the whispers had stopped and we're about to head to the car when, out of nowhere, a truck comes speeding down, seemingly from just where we stepped across from earlier. Naturally, when it stopped, we all freeze. We're in the shadows of the trees trying desperately not to be seen because it's near dawn and we don't want to be caught by some random local in the park, especially not within closing hours and get in trouble. But before we knew what was happening, the driver gets out of his truck and stood facing the crossroad that led out, and we suddenly hear a howl sound. It was deep and almost inhuman. It starts out low in pitch, then gets higher. It's a really creepy sound. It goes silent for a few seconds, then starts again for another 5 or 6. What really caught our attention is that we're out in a small country town at night, so there's a lot of birds and insects, but when the driver started howling, everything went dead silent. I mean, everything. After it started its third howl, we ran to the car and sped off. We didn't know what we witnessed, and we definitely felt that something was horribly wrong. S and I drove about 45 minutes home and dropped off Jay at home, only to decide that we want to go back now that the sun's up. But when we arrived back in Skilly, we're in for a surprise. First off, there is not a crossroad anywhere close to the playground. There was only a curve in the road, but we distinctly remembered seeing a 4-way crossroad under the streetlights. Also, there wasn't a football field that we saw earlier. I know things look different in the dark, but they shouldn't be that different, and all of us remember the same thing. We have no idea what we witnessed that day. It's really crazy, and it seemed almost evil and malevolent. So I had a weird encounter a few months ago, and I feel like maybe this would be a good place to post it. I was sitting in my living room watching TV around 8:30, and it was pretty dark outside. All of a sudden, I heard knocks on my door, so I get up to see who's there. No one I know ever knocks on the door, they just walk in. So anyway, I'm standing on my porch with 3 guys. Just one look at them and I'm scared. They seem almost like caricatures of humans, but ones that walk straight out of hell and onto my doorstep. They were dressed up like Mormon boys in suits, but their name tags only said Jesus Christ. They never introduced themselves and kept asking for people by name. Honestly, I can't convey how uncomfortable it made me feel. I barely remember their faces, but the one in the middle was just smiling the entire time. I don't know how, but my instincts told me that these aren't normal people, and I should never have opened the door. Now, I get out of the conversation by saying I'm cold and don't really have a good time talking. Now I slammed the door and I never saw or heard from them again. It's been a few months now and I still have no idea who they were to this day. Now, I had a house which was in a very nice wooded area. My dad used to be a forest ranger, so as you can imagine, we'd always used to go out camping together or exploring the wilderness and woods. Now, I've had a few experiences, but this one in particular happened when I was only 12 years old. Now, I say only 12 years old, but at the time, I might as well have been a 50-year-old. Having grown up in the wilderness, I was very confident there and actually had no issue being out there alone. Now, there was one particular adventure that we went on that stuck out in my mind. Not really until years later, and I brought it up again with my dad. I'll explain that more later on. Now, for some backstory. My dad was a forest ranger and his brother was too. They'd both been working in the park services for a long time. I mean, literally more than I'd been alive at the time between them each. So, they were very experienced with the unknown or strange experiences. Now, my dad didn't really believe in ghosts or anything. My mum did a lot more, but for some reason my dad just wouldn't believe her. I was kind of on the fence because my mum would tell me these stories about how she used to work and there would be ghosts and things that would open the doors when she was a little bit younger. But I didn't really believe it, to be honest, but who knows? I grew up reading ghost stories in books, so I had a tendency towards it being true. Now, we went out on one particular adventure like normal, and we decided to go further than where we usually would. Now, we want to go into the unknown a bit because, of course, it's nice doing the things you know, but it's better when things are unknown. As we head out, the trees are absolutely beautiful. At the time they seemed giant because I was quite small, but honestly, even if I was there today, they would seem really big. They were very thick too, and there wasn't much space in between the trees, making walking quite difficult at times. When you're into the more dense parts of the forest, you'd really struggle to not move left or right within a second to not walk into another tree. There were some very beautiful red leaves on the floor too, which I think made it very scenic. It was nice and humid too, which actually created a problem where there were mosquitoes and whatnot out, but it didn't really bother me at the time. Now, during this particular adventure, we have a really good time and eventually decide to stop. Just as we do so, my dad says, "Hey, do you recognize that path?" I say no, and my dad says, "I've never seen this before, let's go and explore it." And we can see some stone path that seems to lead up continuously. Now, we can't actually see where this goes to because of the thick trees and the bending nature of the path, but it seems really weird. My dad says this seems like it's a really old design and it shouldn't really be here. We think maybe it's some kind of ruins, but to where? We continue on the path and it actually hurts my feet because I'm used to walking on the soft ground and not this. Now, the actual brickwork, or stone should I say, only rise by about 6 inches to 8, so the steps aren't very deep, but I realise I get extremely tired on this walk. Now, we continue doing so and my dad makes us stop for a minute. We turn back and we can literally see just about where we've come from. We look ahead and it looks almost exactly the same. What I'm trying to say is that we don't know exactly where we're going, and my dad isn't too sure where he's come from. But we have camping equipment which my dad always carries in case of emergencies, so we can put a tent up if we need and find our way back. The issue with this one particular situation is that my dad didn't bring any communication equipment, and this is back in the day, so you don't really have phones and things with you. I would definitely have brought one, but I wouldn't have needed it because the nature was so beautiful. As I'm walking, I realise that another hiker is just off to the left of us. He's wearing a big white robe, which I think is a little bit weird, and I mention it to my dad, but he says, yeah, we're probably near some kind of monument or old house that people are looking at. I think it's a little bit odd because the person's walking on their own and they seem to be following us. They don't seem too weird. They seem maybe 5'8" or 6, so they're not very big, but they're definitely following parallel to us. Now, as we're walking, we realise soon that the steps have disappeared and we're no longer on a path. Just as I mentioned this to my dad, he says, "That's funny because I've just realised I can't see them anywhere." We turn around and look in all directions, and there's pretty much no evidence of any kind of man-made thing being out here, which is pretty strange because my feet are still hurting from the stones. Nonetheless, we continue on. The woods actually changed now, and there's more moss everywhere, and it's actually a little bit slippery. My dad says it's strange because he's never seen the terrain change like this. He said it's almost like we've stepped back in time or something, and this is how it would have looked many years ago when the atmosphere was different slightly. I'm pretty annoyed now because my lovely white and grey shoes are looking a weird green colour and are somewhat grass stained by the moss. I don't know how else to describe it, but you know when you get a stain on your shoes that you know for the life of you isn't going to come off? My dad doesn't seem worried at this point, but a little confused. I'm not really concerned, but I think it's strange that there's no sign of that other hiker. I go to mention it to my dad, but he says to be quiet and look. He says, "Look at that, it's beautiful, isn't it?" And we can see a very old Victorian era house just up ahead. It's literally in the dead centre of the woods, and it's beautiful, and there seems to be people inside of it. I asked my dad if we can explore it. He says, "I'm not sure if we should because I think there's people that actually live there. I don't think they'll have much of a problem with us going in there. Maybe we should." Just as we've stopped to think about what's happening, I get overcome with the sense that somebody's been watching me. I turn to my left, and just in the corner of my peripheral vision, I can see a white thing again. I suddenly realise that it's a hiker that's appeared again, but upon a closer inspection, I can see that their clothes don't really make sense to the environment. It almost looks as though they're wearing clothes which are really old, actually matching those to the people in the house that we've just seen. My dad realises this too, and he actually looks quite worried. Now it's strange because in all the times I've known him, and from where he's worked as a forest ranger, I've never seen him look disturbed or unsettled while being in the woods, so it kind of worries me a bit. My dad then calls out to this person or thing, but it just continues walking. It's almost like it doesn't know that we're there, but it's following virtually parallel to us. The silence that has gone over me and my dad and this thing is somewhat overwhelming when it's interrupted by the sounds of a horse, and I kid you not, a person riding a horse comes straight past us, literally 6 feet away, just dodging in and out of the trees. Again, whatever this person is doing out there doesn't make sense to the environment. Their clothes again are very outdated like the people around us. My dad then grabs my arm and says, "We've got to head back now." I look over my shoulder briefly and I can't figure out where the horseman's gone. But even worse, the whole house is gone. I say, Dad, do you see this?" He says, "Look, just go." And we start jogging now. Now my heart was racing because I've never seen my dad look so worried or in fear before. We continue going relatively quickly but have to stop a bit because the terrain's difficult with the moss. I look behind me and I can't see any other signs of any people, any signs of any buildings being there whatsoever, which is unbelievable because I kid you not, minutes before there was a whole house there with people and my dad saw it as well as me. We keep on running through the forest and we eventually make it back to the normal part, roughly where we started. But what makes this really strange is the entire path that we'd seen before is no longer there. The very thing that made my feet hurt doesn't seem to exist anymore, and the air just feels different. I don't know how to describe it. My dad says we need to get home quickly, and eventually we make it back to our home. I start telling my mum about what happened and she says that's really strange. She tells us that maybe we've had some kind of time warp and it's a known thing where people seem to touch or go somewhere and they suddenly are thrown back into time. Some kind of time loop, I don't know how to describe it. Now at the time, I desperately wanted to tell all my friends and family, but my dad quickly stops me and my mum. My mum's worried that my dad's not going to be able to get work if this is reported, but upon further investigation, there used to be an ancient settlement in this part of the woods, and the houses would match up perfectly with the one that we had seen. Now I don't want to say it was paranormal or some kind of ghostly activity, but I have no idea what it was. It was literally like we'd stepped back in time and we were watching something that we couldn't be a part of, and the things we were watching had no idea that we were there. Now I'm an avid hiker who enjoyed nothing more than camping in the great outdoors or scenic walks through the wilderness. I did have one experience, however, that really changed my views on things while doing so. It was during the springtime that I went solo camping and hiking. Now I live near a beautiful national park that had lots of forest rangers in the area, so help was always just a call away if you really needed it, so I never felt too bad being there. So I set out on my trek to find a good camping spot, and it was absolutely beautiful. What I really liked about this walk is that you're very isolated out there, but like I said, never too far from danger. I love being at one with the nature and really felt peace in doing so. I remembered walking on the trail and thinking how beautiful nature is, and almost like we don't deserve this. The trees were really pretty there with moss on it, and there was lots of different kinds of trees. Now for the first part of my hike, everything's going brilliantly. The scenery eventually changes and I see a small stream just ahead of me, and large hills or mountains, I'm not sure what you'd call them, off in the distance. There's beautiful red brush on either side of where I was walking, and I really think this is perfect and how lucky I am to be able to enjoy this. Now you have to be careful while walking because there are wild animals like anywhere, but you have to remember that this is their home, not yours, and you're just a visitor. As I'm walking, I see a big blue tent to the left of me. It's a strange colour, almost like a sky blue one, and it doesn't really look in place, if that makes sense. It's literally next to the path too. I can also see a fire pit just up to the right side of where I am, but I don't think too much of it. I do see some strange sticks up ahead that actually look like bones, but upon closer inspection though, I realise that these are literally just sticks, so I'm not really worried, and I continue onwards. As I continue making my way down, I can see a really beautiful lake ahead of me, and there seems to be somebody fishing just off in the distance. I sit down for a moment on one of the rocks that actually overlooks a beautiful lake, and I think how nice this is. I sit here for a while and suddenly hear a whistling sound. It's definitely coming from the person over by the lake, and I'm not sure whether it's to me or not, but it's enough to unsettle me, and I continue onwards. It's starting to get a little bit dark now, but I can still see pretty well around me. I just admire how pretty the trees are because there's green, red and yellow ones all around me. I decide I should at least get away from this person's camping spot. As I do so, I notice an ancient grave marking to my left. It's made out of sticks and has probably been there for a long time, but I think this is really strange. I've never really seen anything like it before. I stop again on another side of the lake now. I'm thinking of how beautiful it is here, and I can actually see snow-covered hilltops or mountains in the distance slightly. I'm met once again by the whistling sound, which I think is really odd. I've now decided that I actually want to go further before I set up camp because I need to get away from whoever these people are. I'm not sure whether it's the same person doing this, but I can't be sure, so I'm always going to be cautious, especially where I'm on my own in this situation. I eventually come across a beautiful site and set up for the night. I make a very small fire, eat my food, and lay back reading a book. I'm suddenly hear a loud bang sound next to where I am. It's hard to describe, but it's almost like somebody's threw something that shattered. I look outside and, to my surprise, there's broken glass all around. I get really angry and scream, "Hey, who the hell did that?" I look around and I can't see anyone. This is a really bizarre moment for me. I'm too tired to actually change my camping location and I ended up falling asleep exactly where I was, which I now realise is pretty stupid in hindsight. But strangely enough, when I woke up the glass was actually missing from where I was. I'd actually slept in for too long now, and I was actually a little bit annoyed at myself for doing so. I decided not to worry and just continue on my hike. I don't want to let some idiot ruin this for me because it's so beautiful. I continue on my hike like normal and I come across a small bridge, and I stop to appreciate how beautiful the stream is running next to it over some rocks. As I do so, I hear something fall from a tree. I think this is really strange because I haven't heard any animals at this point, and it was very close to me. I stop again and a rock actually hits me. Now I look up quickly and laugh thinking, oh, the squirrels are doing stuff to me and don't want me here. But I get a feeling I should continue on, and I continue down the opposite direction that I've come from. I decide that I need to get to an area closer to civilizations or at least a ranger station in case I'm in trouble. Now I do know roughly where I'm going, so I'm not too scared, but on the walk down I have to be careful because there's lots of trees that have fallen all around me. Now it gets to that time again where I have to settle in for the night. Now this particular night was much more eventful than the other ones I've been in, especially any other time camping. Let me explain. The exact same thing happens again. I'm reading a book and I hear a strange sound around me. It unsettles me and I decide to get out and see what it is, thinking maybe there's a dog or something outside, but I don't see anything. I look around in all directions and I can just about make out some kind of orange thing in the distance. Now, I don't know how to describe it other than one of those chemical or hazmat suits, but without the big glass or plastic bit on the front. It's almost like the kind of stuff you'd wear skiing, but not, if that makes sense. I wasn't really close enough to know exactly what these are, but I realise there's multiple people standing in very similar outfits. Thinking my mind's playing tricks on me, I convince myself this can't be anything that I'm actually seeing and go back to sleep again. When I wake up the following day, there's strange markings around my tent. Nothing too worrying, but just really weird things like stones moved around and a small cross made out of sticks. Okay, this is too much for even me to handle. I decide that I should start heading back now. Only problem is the quickest way to get back is through an even longer hike, but eventually it becomes a shortcut. I decide this is a better option as I hopefully won't encounter more of these people, and I considered radioing it in to the rangers or trying to contact them, but I think, what if this is just my mind playing tricks on me? So I continue walking after packing up my things. Now the trees again are very beautiful. In this part, you can see very clearly through them, which actually makes me feel more comfortable. If that makes sense, like there's lots of trees but you can see through them and there's lots of light. But it kind of does that flashing shadowy thing which is a little bit annoying, but I've got bigger fish to fry at this point. The path now is more of an asphalt or gravel, I don't really know how to describe it, but it's much better than where I was. I still don't see any signs of life though, which I think is pretty strange. I get to about 10 miles out from where I need to be, but night's setting in and I'm getting cold, so I set up my camp once again. This time, I decide to leave some of the leaves and whatnot to at least hide my shelter. And this probably took a good 40 minutes to do, but really, I hid this well. Standing back, I actually lost my tent a few times and I couldn't figure out exactly where I was. Anyway, I'd eventually go back into my tent and settle in for the night. And I can tell you it was a cold one today. It's strange because the other days haven't been cold like this, but I think maybe it's just because where I've had to camouflage my shelter it's more cold. I don't know, I'm pretty confused. Now this time when I go to sleep, I'm extremely vigilant, very paranoid that somebody or something might be outside waiting for me. I listen and listen and listen, convinced that there's going to be something out there, but I don't hear anything, and I eventually fall asleep. I remembered waking up feeling like I'd slept for an exceptionally long time. I'm thinking maybe I was so tired that I'd hallucinated all of the other things, and that this is what I needed. However, when I opened my eyes, it was a different story. Let me explain. When I woke up, I could see lots of my things, like clothes and whatever I left outside the tent had been burnt. Now it's strange because this completely contradicted the beautiful environment that I was in, but Lord have mercy did it scare me. What's more is there was more strange markings into the ground. They normally had crosses or stars, and some of them appeared to be in some kind of red paint, or blood. Looking back on it now, I'm certain this was blood, but I just didn't want to accept it because I was quite scared at the time. All I knew is this looked extremely weird and should not have been here. And who the hell had burnt my stuff? It seemed odd too because when I looked around, I realised that nobody was here but me. And I decided to investigate further, actually getting angry. Why has somebody burnt all of my freaking stuff? I had an expensive camera too that was now gone. I knew I should have slept with it. But the thing that I couldn't understand was how did anybody know where I was? I could not have hid the shelter better. It was next to a large collapsed tree too, and honestly I think even animals would have struggled to find this, but what's that stench? There's a smell that I just can't seem to shake. It smells absolutely disgusting. I look around trying to find the source of it and I can't find anything. I realise there's no point taking my tent now because, well, it's covered in leaves and things that are a little bit dirty and it was a cheap one anyway, but I can't figure out the smell. I then decide to look on the opposite side of the large tree that I put my tent up against, and then I see it. An animal carcass, which is disfigured to the point I can't figure out what this is. It looks like an animal's had its way with it and absolutely destroyed it, but it's perked up onto a cross made out of sticks. So 1, this is no animal, and 2, who or whatever done this is absolutely insane. I lose my breath for a second and the next thing I know, I'm in full sprint mode trying to cover the 10 miles as quick as possible. I leave literally everything there. I walk past some joggers who must think what's wrong with me as I get closer to where the car park is. I eventually made it over there, then immediately drive to the nearest ranger station. I don't know who or what done this, but clearly they can do lots of harm. But how the hell did they find me? How long and how close must they have been following me for if they could see exactly where I went, figure out I camouflaged my tent, and then did God knows what outside? I quickly report it to the ranger, and this is then passed on and they say that I can come back in a couple of weeks and they're going to investigate. They tell me that they think it's probably some cultists because they've had strange activity out there before and people doing weird things, but they just can't seem to find them, saying I'm extremely lucky based on what they've heard about things that happened before, but they wouldn't tell me anything else about it, saying come back and we'll let you know what happened, leave it to us. Well, I hate to say this, but I never had the nerve to go back there and find out. I don't know whether it's some kind of natural thing that my brain was doing to try and protect me or whatever, but I just couldn't face it. I never went camping again after that, alone or in groups. You can imagine why. I struggle sometimes when I fall asleep if I hear noises now. I think I might have some minor PTSD from it because every time there's a sound when I'm sleeping that makes me jump, I think things are about to go south really quickly and I think I'm being followed and I'm about to be attacked. So last week, me and my friend went camping together for the first time and something happened. When we got to the site, there was one other person there, a young, like early 20s woman named Joey. She introduced herself and said she knew the woods like the back of her hand and offered to show us around. We accepted it and off she went, showing us some of the trails and the best views, and was very sweet. She even joined us at our fire at night and talked about how she grew up camping with her dad. And around 12, she left and went to bed. When we woke up, I mentioned how nice Joey had been to my friend, but she had no idea who I was talking about. According to her, we're the only ones there, and we had found the spot by ourselves. And we had gone to bed much earlier. Over the next few days I kept mentioning it, but she's adamant there was no Joey ever. We left after 4 days and have talked about it since, but she still doesn't remember despite having very clear memories of the whole day with Joey. I even checked the pictures I took, no Joey. Not even someone who looks like her. What happened? So this encounter happened many years ago when I was very young. It was in 2001 or 2, and I was 11 or 12 at the time. My uncle was interested in purchasing some land near Red Oak, Oklahoma. I don't know exactly where, but it was several acres in very remote wilderness. My father, mother and myself decided to accompany him one Saturday and scope out the property. From our home, it was a little more than a 3-hour drive, but we all loved riding in the car. So, while it was not going to be the most eventful road trip ever, it was nice to get out of the house. Upon arrival, I remembered being very underwhelmed by this. No houses anywhere near, and hardly even signs of life, apart from birds, and the wooded area wasn't exactly what I'd call picturesque. Still, we park our car off the road and go to explore a little deeper into the woods. My uncle was talking about buying the land for hunting, not really my cup of tea. As we walk through the woods, it's a really nice day, but something feels weird. Everyone in our group remarked about the weird feeling, but Dad and Uncle laughed it off. My mum had goosebumps and kept looking over her shoulder, which makes me on edge. She was very insistent that it's weird and she wanted to leave, saying it felt like she's being watched. After a bit of hiking, I noticed that there's a small red building. I've seen bigger storage sheds in the shrubs, but it looks very well built. My uncle said there was nothing about it on the listing, so we went to peek inside and the doors open. And inside there were open cans of food, a ratty blanket on the floor, and it stunk like nothing I've ever smelt before. Following the discovery, we all agreed it would be best to get back into the car, and if there was something crazy in the woods, then we wouldn't be there to find him, whoever it was. Only issue, we had walked pretty far into the woods and now weren't exactly sure which direction was correct. The eerie feeling really ramped up and we were all scared. We ended up trekking another mile before we finally found the road, but when we were further down from the road where we parked our car, we weren't really sure exactly where we were, but at least we could just follow the road. Walking along the road, we come across a truly unsettling sight. Right in the middle of the asphalt was a dark grey cat on fire. I have no idea why a cat was there or how that came to be, but obviously we're really confused and there's no one in sight. We ran over the rest of the way to the car and there was a huge scratch in the paint all the way down the side. Thankfully, that was the only damage and my dad was able to start it without any trouble, and we drive as fast as we possibly can. My heart is jumping as I even recount this story. I was hunting for black bear one day. Bloody hell. Back in the early 2000s. The area I was hunting in was northern Clinton County. My ex-brother-in-law and I enjoyed the area and spent many a season scouting and hunting these lands. This part of the county is filled with long hollows, steep inclines and hard to access trails. We both liked to do our thing and hunt separate terrains. I would often drive down into the hollows while he looked around the ridgelines hoping to get a shot at whatever I pushed over the top. We both carried pretty bumped up two-way radios to keep a general idea of where we are, although often the terrain makes it difficult to get a good reception. This was a typical PA, bear season. It was on the Wednesday of the season, third and last day of the brief season it was back then. The woods were quiet with no distant whooping or yodeling of various opening day camps. Driving through the woods, the weather was cold, grey and windy when we separate to begin our hunt, and continue throughout the day. I spent the day still hunting down this long hollow south of a little town in central Clinton County, with the idea of meeting my brother-in-law at the top of the ridge at the agreed time of 4 p.m, giving us plenty of time to hike through together the last few miles back to his truck. After hunting all day, I found an old game trail that appeared to meander its way up the ridge down towards where he knew I'd be waiting. After close to an hour, maybe around 3:30, I made my way 2/3 over the top, stopping often, securing the slope of that jet black fur of a roaming bear. Along the trail, I come upon a used fire ring, and I mean long ago. It was very rudimentary in its build and appearance, having only been used once. The ring's rocks were covered in lint and only had the faintest traces of black from a long time ago. I found it odd that a fire ring would be here, considering the steepness of the slope, but it was a very small, somewhat leveled ridge. Then I figured I would sit and eat the rest of my pack food and sit still, hoping to catch a final chance to see a bear. All the while it felt odd, somewhat unwelcoming, like I shouldn't have been there, almost like I was at a forbidden interloper on somebody's valued spot. I sat for maybe 20 minutes and thought it was time to continue the trek upwards to my bud. As I stood up, I slung my backpack on and reached down to sling my rifle on my shoulder. As I stood up, I hear my name called out very loudly. It really didn't sound like it was behind me, rather all around in my head. Just as I turned around, my rifle was slapped off my shoulder and I felt force, and something slapped a big bit of wood across the stock. I quickly managed to save my gun from dashing into the rocks at my feet. I grabbed it in the nick of time before turning around, and I'm ready to see who or what it was. There's nobody there though, and there's absolutely no way it could have been my brother-in-law. No one was there. It's crazy because if anybody rushed off, I would have definitely seen them and definitely heard them. I had a sick feeling in my stomach, chills run throughout my body. I muttered a Hail Mary a few times and speed up to the top of the ridge, meeting my buddy, and we quietly hike our way out of the woods to his truck, in the dark spread of evening. This has bothered me for years now, and I have no idea what happened that day. I never went back to that area of woods too. My brother has a winter job closing parks. He drives around in a country vehicle and makes sure no one is in the park before closing the gates. He does this from about 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. and it's pretty dark out. The other day he was closing one of the parks when he saw a man hopping through the woods. The man then saw him and crouched down and just watches my brother. Another time, my brother left and went to another park where he found a coyote completely frozen still as though it was still alive. I was hiking in Walmati National Forest on a trail that I'm very familiar with. I had my two dogs with me, a hound and a Labrador. We had just got off a really steep hill, and I sat down for a rest. My dogs are usually cruising around, sniffing out little critters and enjoying themselves. Suddenly, one of the dogs starts growling and staring down the trail where we had just come from. Just like that, they both get up next to me and start growling, staring down the trail, then running. Coming back though. It's not a particularly bushy area, so I can see pretty far but don't see anything, but the dogs are convinced something's there, and I believe them. Maybe a cougar? After a while they calmed down, and we kept going and looped back on another trail. I had a pocket knife with me that I kept for the remainder of the journey and kept looking back. We eventually get back okay, but since then they've never acted like it, and I have no idea what it was to this day. I've been backpacking and camping mostly solo as an adult for the majority of my life. I'm cautious about my surroundings, and I listen carefully when out. I try to remain an observer and move through the land with little impact. I'm also very interested in mysterious and obscure, cryptids or just things that are unknown. Now, this is something that I've always been interested in, to be honest. Now, I've read most of the missing 411 cases, and I am a serious devotee of true crime, all the morbid and curious things I can find, anything strange that will fire the imagination, truthfully. Now, there have been occasions where I felt slightly uncomfortable or even watched when I've been out in the woods, but mostly I've chalked it up to me just being out there on my own, really, and maybe just being alert. My inherent skepticism makes me less susceptible to encounters with other things that I've experienced. I look for the logical explanation first. I never encountered anything truly off or really deranged people out in the forest, but I do consider the biggest threat to be the human animal. A few years ago, I set out to camp near an old forest growth in North Georgia. Most of my old growth here is gone, but there are places that haven't been logged, and if you get the chance to visit one, wherever you live, I'd suggest it. It's beautiful, very scenic, and alive in a way that's hard to describe. Now, this particular forest was one of the hemlock and poplar, and the trees there are massive. I had a guidebook that gave me directions out into the sticks, following little country roads that eventually turned into gravel, after a long drive into a national forest park where I lived near the trail, which was unmaintained, meaning it wasn't very popular or highly travelled. I hiked out through the woods to where the trail eventually kind of stops. There was very little undergrowth. I spent the afternoon just exploring it, looking at the trees and enjoying the calm. I eventually made my way down to a creek and crossed over to it to an open field that formed a sort of bowl in the land with hills and ridges on all sides. The fact that there was a field means that there had, I guessed at one point, been people living in that area, but I don't really see anything when I get there indicating there's settlements or whatnot. I set up my tent and made some food. It was late when I decided to have a little smoke and lay out in the field in front of my tent and look at the stars before bed. There was little to no light pollution, and I always relished the opportunity to enjoy looking at the stars. As I lay there, I began hearing a loud knocking sound coming up from the ridge where I'd been earlier in the day, maybe 1,000 yards away. There's actually 3 knocks, which are followed by a long pause. 3 more than a repeat. When I say knocks, I mean very loud noises like 2 logs or trees being hit together. Loud enough to really unsettle me and feel the reverberation in the bowl I was eating out of. Loud enough that you can feel it almost. I could pinpoint where the sound was coming from, but it was right in the forest and it's dark out now. I thought that it had been a person making the noise, because what else would make such a rhythmic sound? It was extremely loud and would have been considerably difficult to make this much noise. I'd also seen no one else during the day in that direction too, or anyone else at all. Eventually the sound stopped and I went to bed, feeling like I'd heard something I wasn't supposed to hear, Or maybe I heard something specifically which was meant for me to hear it. Now, I've told my friends about this experience and they either say that it was for sure a Sasquatch or I had a close encounter with a strange person, but why would a person be out in the woods so late at night, smashing logs together so loud? I've been backpacking and camping mostly solo as an adult for the majority of my life. I'm cautious about my surroundings and I listen carefully when out. I try to remain an observer and move through the land with little impact. I'm also very interested in mysterious and obscure cryptids or just things that are unknown. Now, this is something that I've always been interested in, to be honest. Now, I've read most of the missing 411 cases, and I am a serious devotee of true crime, all the morbid and curious things I can find, anything strange that will fire the imagination, truthfully. Now, there have been occasions where I felt slightly uncomfortable or even watched when I've been out in the woods, but mostly I've chalked it up to me just being out there on my own, really, and maybe just being alert. My inherent skepticism makes me less susceptible to encounters with other things that I've experienced. I look for the logical explanation first. I never encountered anything truly off or really deranged people out in the forest, but I do consider the biggest threat to be the human animal. A few years ago, I set out to camp near an old forest growth in North Georgia. Most of my old growth here is gone, but there are places that haven't been logged, and if you get the chance to visit one, wherever you live, I'd suggest it. It's beautiful, very scenic, and alive in a way that's hard to describe. Now, this particular forest was one of the hemlock and poplar, and the trees there are massive. I had a guidebook that gave me directions out into the sticks, following little country roads that eventually turned into gravel after a long drive into a national forest park where I lived near the trail, which was unmaintained, meaning it wasn't very popular or highly travelled. I hiked out through the woods to where the trail eventually kind of stops. There was very little undergrowth. I spent the afternoon just exploring it, looking at the trees and enjoying the calm. I eventually made my way down to a creek and crossed over to it to an open field that formed a sort of bowl in the land with hills and ridges on all sides. The fact that there was a field means that there had, I guessed at one point, been people living in that area, but I don't really see anything when I get there indicating there's settlements or whatnot. I set up my tent and made some food. It was late when I decided to have a little smoke and lay out in the field in front of my tent and look at the stars before bed. There was little to no light pollution, and I always relished the opportunity to enjoy looking at the stars. As I lay there, I began hearing a loud knocking sound coming up from the ridge where I'd been earlier in the day, maybe 1,000 yards away. There's actually 3 knocks which are followed by a long pause. 3 more than a repeat. When I say knocks, I mean very loud noises like 2 logs or trees being hit together. Loud enough to really unsettle me and feel the reverberation in the bowl I was eating out of. Loud enough that you can feel it almost. I could pinpoint where the sound was coming from, but it was right in the forest and it's dark out now. I thought that it had been a person making the noise, because what else would make such a rhythmic sound? It was extremely loud and would have been considerably difficult to make this much noise. I'd also seen no one else during the day in that direction too, or anyone else at all. Eventually the sound stopped and I went to bed, feeling like I'd heard something I wasn't supposed to hear, or maybe I heard something specifically which was meant for me to hear it. Now, I've told my friends about this experience and they either say that it was for sure a Sasquatch or I had a close encounter with a strange person, but why would a person be out in the woods so late at night, smashing logs together so loud? Okay, so I've been a skeptic of paranormal things my whole life. I've never really believed in that type of stuff, but the things I have heard and seen at my grandpa's farm shakes my core. My grandpa owned a large plot of land in central Missouri, and they've owned that land for about 40 years. I have been to that farm over 10 times, and every time I go, I always get this terrifying feeling that somebody's watching me. Like, there's always something behind my back. I have also had many strange encounters that are downright bizarre. My first encounter with whatever the hell this thing is when I was around 7 to 9 years of age. Now, we brought our dog named Spot to the farm. He was a silver Labrador who I loved dearly. I was exploring in the forest behind the house, just enjoying the summer breeze when my dog starts growling. A deep sinister growl that I've never heard him make before. I turn around quickly to see what he's growling at, but I can't see anything but forests along with trees. While my eyes were scanning the area for what my dog's growling at, some sort of animal shot out of the brush so fast that I can barely see what it is. Before I know it, it's gone. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, absolutely flabbergasted by what I'd witnessed. From what I could see, it looked like a coyote, but the speed at which it moves is absolutely insane. Moving at 90 miles an hour and makes almost no sound. But the creepy part was that the place it jumped out of didn't even have an imprint of where it was lying. And from where I viewed it jumping up, I should have easily been able to see it hiding. Shocked by what I've witnessed, I decided to head back. My second encounter happened when I was around 10. I was visiting the place and, like usual, I get the feeling that I'm being watched. The first day was normal and nothing creepy really happened. I was just spending quality time with my family, but when night came, that's when things start happening. So I was trying to sleep in the twin bed that was shared by my mum's brother when he used to live there, when I heard tapping. Not tiny little taps, but loud ones like banging. It was coming from the direction of the window. I slowly sat up and looked to the window, but there's nothing there, so I just think it's an animal or something. 5 minutes pass by and there's no tapping, and I go off to sleep. This time, a tap, a slam, a loud slam directly into the window. I'm not talking like a hit. It sounded like something absolutely massive on the window. I shot up quickly and nearly faint. I decide enough is enough and grab a flashlight from the drawer and shine it into the window. 10 seconds go by and there's absolutely nothing. I was going to go crawl into my mum's bed when I heard it, a screech. One that's not achievable by any human. It's so loud that it actually pierces the summer night. I can't put into words what it sounds like, but it was dark and horrible, and I still remember it now. I froze, unable to move a muscle. I was so scared. I was sitting there, still as a statue, petrified by this. That's when my instincts kicked in and they told me to run into my mum's room, which I did. For some reason, I didn't wake her up and just cuddled her. I don't sleep the entire night. All I could think of is the sound. My next encounter was when I was around 13 years of age. I was back at my grandpa's just enjoying my time like I usually do when my grandpa suggested that we go deer watching. I agreed because I had been doing this thing for a long time and I never had an issue with it, and it was extremely fun. We take the Polaris and at around 6 or 7 we're looking for deer. We decided to go into the most eastern pasture because that's usually where we spotted the deer. 30 minutes passed and we had seen a deer, but not as much as normal. But then, this is where things begin. I get that feeling again, that dreadful feeling that something is there, in the shadows watching me, but this time it's more intense. Like, it's right up behind me. Whenever I look there, I can't see it, but this time, it appears my grandpa feels a presence too. Just to let all of you know, my grandpa's a very laid-back person who's always joking and having a good time. I've seen him very serious before, but not like this. So, when I start feeling like I'm being watched, my grandpa goes from happy and laid back to extremely alert. He grips the wheel so tight his knuckles turn white, and he was constantly looking around to make sure something wasn't following us. He then made a massive U-turn out of nowhere and starts heading back. I said, "What are you doing?" and he says, "We're going back now." cold like you've witnessed a murder. At this point, he was gripping the wheel even harder and absolutely going full speed. I decide not to ask any questions until we make it back. Once there, he rushes me inside the home, constantly checking back to make sure nothing's there. When we're inside and he closes and locks the door, his behaviours are alarming and it actually shocks me. I decided that of all the stuff I've witnessed, this is one of the most scariest, and say, what the hell is going on here? When I said that, he said, I need to explain something to you. We then sat down for 30 minutes and he explained whatever this thing was living on his property has been there since the day he moved in, and he and my mother experienced the exact same thing that was happening to me the first few years of living here. He explained that whatever this thing is, it doesn't like visitors there, hence why we're experiencing problems. He told me about all of the things that he witnessed and experienced, and that they seem to have been pretty similar to what is happening to me. He told me that he knew this was going to happen to me, and that he's always making sure nothing bad ever happened because he knows the creature's there. We talked some more, but it's all the same. It was now late and I decided that I couldn't sleep alone, so he had me sleep with my mum. Luckily, we promptly leave the following morning. The last encounter isn't really an encounter. Two things that have happened at my grandpa's farm. Now recently we had brought my sister's horse there. The first night for the horse was hell. My sister's horse has always been very friendly and not shy, but the first night of my sister's horse being at the farm is bizarre. The next morning my grandpa woke up and was doing his usual chores, and he went to feed the horses when he noticed that the horse was acting weird, extremely shy and timid. But when he took a look, he was shocked. The horse had 3-inch gashes on the side of it, sliced into it like claws had made it. It was ruled out that the horse ran into the fence, but I don't know. Also around the same time, my grandpa adopted a dog and named it Panda. Panda was a Jack Russell Terrier who was 2 months of age. 5 days later, he was found passed away with deep punches on the side of his body. They ruled it out as a bobcat or mountain lion, but honestly, I think otherwise. So I'm not a ranger, but I was camping in the woods. Now, the backwoods campground with the nearest sign of humanity being a National Guard depot about 5 miles away. It was a week before Labor Day and the campground was completely empty. We're half asleep in our tent when we hear what sounds like a little girl laughing in the distance. It continues for about an hour, and it's safe to say we don't get any sleep that night. So this wasn't in the woods necessarily, but in the middle of nowhere in the desert, and I wanted to share this. So back in 2006, I made a road trip from Phoenix, Arizona to Esther Park, CO to camp with my friends. I was driving solo and saw pictures of a place called Coal Mine Canyon that was on the Navajo reservation. I think I finally pronounced that correct too. It looked like quite a cool place, and it was pretty secluded, so I put it into my Apple map and headed that way. I get off the highway while in Tuba City and drove about 15 miles to where I'd turn off for the canyon. I thought it was weird that there weren't any signs, and Apple Maps directed me to turn off the road onto a 1-lane dirt road. A mile or so into the road, I got to a point where the road descended at about 10 to 15% grade. Now, it wasn't until I got to the bottom that I realised how steep this was, and also it was very muddy at the bottom, but I continue onwards. Every minute further, when I started to realise that I was going into the wrong place, I felt uneasy. But the road was narrow and had thick desert bushes on either side, so it wasn't possible to turn around now. To make things worse, I didn't have service and nobody knows where I am. Finally, I got to the end of the road, which was a point that stood another 200 feet above a valley, and had a very creepy shack built there. There was also something about that shack that didn't sit right with me. While it's a nice spot, it was very desolate and gives me bad vibes. The scenery was pretty, so I go out and take some pictures, and on my way back to the car, I noticed that there's a person looking at me through the window/opening in the shack. It was far enough away that I couldn't see facial features or expressions. They're just looking at me. I ended up booking it to my car and turned around and headed back. As I was approaching the 10 to 15% grade, I noticed a big truck at the top just sitting there and my heart stops. It wasn't there before when I was on the way down. When I got close to the hill, the truck started to drive down it, and I knew this meant I had no way out as I didn't have enough room to get around it, and I wasn't able to drive into the bushes. The truck and I slowly made our way closer to each other as I scanned for other places to get off of the side of the road and get out their way. No luck. We stopped about 30 feet away from each other, and I noticed there was 3 men in the truck staring at me. I give a little wave and they didn't give me anything back. At this point, I had no idea what to do and I thought I was about to die. I was trespassing on their property and the person in the shack must have notified them. I didn't know if it was 30 seconds or 30 minutes later, but to my surprise, the truck pulled off the path and into the bushes to let me around them. I slowly go past them. While doing so, they're staring at me, and I see 6 eyes, completely expressionless, staring back at me. I got to the muddy area at the base of the hill, and wasn't sure I'd be able to get enough speed and traction to go up the hill. I go as quick as I can and shot up it. When I got off the dirt road, I gunned it down into Tuba City, and out of there as fast as possible. Sometimes when I think back, I get a horrible feeling in my stomach and I can't think about anything other than what would have happened if they didn't get out of my way. Let me start off by saying that this is a true story that happened when I was 13. I'm now 27. Whether you believe it or not is up to you. Now, my dad used to be a part of a small hunting club in Alabama. It's just a group of guys he grew up with. Once a year, we would drive to the small town of Elba to camp for a few days and then go hunting. There were a few different areas of land around that town that the club owned, and club members would go hunting there. One of these pieces of land was nicknamed the cemetery because, well, it had an old cemetery there. Nothing really creepy about the cemetery. It was in the woods and the graves were of a slave owner and the graves of his slaves. Now, in this area of land called the cemetery, there's 5 or 6 green fields. Basically, a cleared out area that has no trees and just grass and a buck hunt on it. This is a tree house that you sit in and wait for deers to go onto the green field. This particular evening, we were going on the hunt on the green field 1, the plot directly behind the old cemetery. The evening started off normal enough. My dad parked the truck and we walked down the trail to the buck hut. We climbed up and started to wait and watch the woods. Now, a little bit of time passes and my dad tells me that he's gonna go for a short walk to see if maybe there's any deers on the trail. Keep in mind I'm 13 years old. Not a big deal. I've hunted by myself before and I'm not really scared to be in the woods alone. Besides, it's still pretty light out. So I said okay and he climbs down. It was just me, my caliber 32 Marlin rifle, the grass fields in front of me and the dense woods around. There is this strange feeling though. I sat there for an eternity, or what felt like it, and it was now almost twilight. My concern for my dad was growing because he's still not returned. I'm worried that maybe something's happened to him, or maybe he got lost. However, he's an experienced hunter, and if he was lost, he would yell or start a fire or something. I figure maybe he found a good spot and he wanted to hunt the twilight/dusk hour because that's prime for hunting. So I focused my attention on the grass field in front of me, just watching and listening for a deer to walk out on the field as the light begins to fade. Just then, across the field, I saw and heard some brush moving and breaking. I thought that maybe it's my dad, but I highly doubted it. No way it could have been him. That would be incredibly dangerous and stupid, but I raised my rifle, pull back the hammer, aiming at the moving brush and wait patiently for what I hoped was a deer to walk out. Then, a girl seems to float out of the woods and onto the field. She has transparent white hair with a long flowing dress. She floated from one side to the other and completely disappears. I watched her for a solid minute or two. I can't believe my eyes. I'm now terrified. Now I wait for my dad to get back. A short time passes and it's now pitch black and I'm here alone. My concern for my dad is turning to panic, but I was too afraid to yell or go looking for him, and I just saw a ghost. I sat there for hours terrified alone in the darkness, and thankfully he returned. He acted like he had only been gone for not long at all. I asked him where was he, and he said that he just went for a short walk up the trail and come back. The timeline makes no sense. He was gone for hours. It was unlike him to go for that long, but he was adamant that he'd only been gone for about 30 minutes. We then walked down the trail back to his truck. I couldn't get out of there fast enough and the whole experience still confuses me. Was the ghost I saw an old slave or slave owner buried in the woods behind me, or something else entirely? Did my dad go through some time warp, or what happened? I never went hunting there again, and I don't ever plan on going back there. About a year ago, my husband and I were camping on the banks of a local river. It was early spring and the forest was loud with the noises of insects, frogs, birds and other woodland creatures, all shaking off the chill of winter. We were camping right on the river at night and we could definitely hear the crickets, frogs, fish jumping and rolling in the river, and a few very grumpy swans nesting nearby. The second night we were there, I couldn't sleep, so I popped my head over to the side of the hammock to watch over the water flowing. I loved watching water. It was mesmerizing and soothing. It was a bright night, and the moon was full, or very nearly full, and I could see the river very clearly without even having to put on my glasses. Now, I watched the river for a while, enjoying the randomness of ripples caused by a little water bug skimming over them on the surface, and I then noticed that one ripple didn't seem that random. Water bugs swim around in a short little spurt before changing direction. This one was going in a straight line. The ripple it was making is much larger than the others. I tried to get a better look at it and noticed that something's poking up out of the water. That was when I noticed the forest had gone absolutely silent. The comforting canopy of springtime noises was replaced with complete silence. It was bizarre and unnerving. I didn't feel exactly scared. It was more a feeling of this is wrong, but in a way that I can't describe. I watched as this ripple swarm goes downstream and there's sudden eerie silence. It was moving faster than the water current. I thought about reaching for my glasses, but that seems wrong. Like I shouldn't move or breathe. The air felt hot and oppressive, where it had previously been present, but now was completely gone. The silence lasts just as long as this ripple, this thing, crossed my field of vision. It felt like minutes, but was probably only 30 seconds. Once it was out of sight of the forest, everything resumed like normal. I watched the water for a little while before I lay back in my hammock. Nothing else weird happens and eventually I fall asleep. I later tried to rationalize what I've experienced, but the best possible rationalization that I can come up with is that there was a really big fish that happened to come past the surface. But how big of a fish would it have had to have been to make the whole forest go silent? And also, why didn't I see it? We have a cabin that is remote. It is where I stay for work. I'm always told not to go there alone for safety reasons, as this is a very remote area. Things can go wrong quickly and help is far away. This trip, I went alone as I need to get work done there. I also needed time to get away from the city and its life. Getting out into the wild is easy and a good way to reset, and I needed this. My trip ended up taking long. I get into camp at about 1:30 AM. I stopped the truck, put on my headlamp, and went straight to the warehouse to get the generator going. I connected the power and the cabin lights up. There was a ton of snowfall, so I do my usual inspection to see if I can spot any tracks around the cabin, like wolf tracks, moose tracks, or human tracks, and I can't find anything. I head into the cabin, light a fire, and cook myself a late meal. It is very remote. There isn't any cell service, but I did download some movies on my phone to keep me occupied. It helps me fall asleep. I did eventually fall asleep, but at around 2:30 AM, I decided to add more logs onto the fire to make sure it lasts through the winter night. As I was doing this, I noticed that someone or something is walking on the deck towards the front door. You know that sound when snow is being crunched by a boot? That's what I was hearing. I think weird. There's no vehicle here. So, I listen just to be sure I'm hearing this correctly when then, I'm 100% sure somebody's outside. I get up from the chair where I was sitting and immediately look out of the window, then move to the front door and unlock it. I then look towards where I hear these footsteps. I call out and there's nothing. Again, nothing. I thought to myself, well, whatever it is, it wants fear, and there's no way I'm giving it that. I close the door and lock it to be sure. I stay up for a little while longer to listen, but nothing. I thought to myself, maybe a marten, which are common critters around these parts. So I fall asleep again. The next morning, I check for tracks and there were prints. Now, there were some, but I can't confirm if it's mine or not. I'd forgotten to check the moment I got up and walked around a few times. I've gone back there with company like usual, and I stay up a little later than everyone else to listen, but I've never heard them again. Where I'm from, legend states that when you're alone in the wilderness, things will creep up on you and play tricks on you if you're not supposed to be there, and you must not respond or they'll get you. There was one time that I went camping with my older brother and the Boy Scouts. We had our own tent a little bit further away from everyone else, and in one particular moment during the night I needed to pee, so I get up and go off. Quite a way because I don't want the embarrassment of anyone seeing me. After I finish, I hear laughter. I think, God, I guess they've seen me peeing and I'm actually really annoyed. Until I realise that it's not a normal laughter, and it sounds like a much older person than the people I'm staying with. It's almost hysterical laughter. I look off to the left of me and find the source of the sounds. Someone is running through the forest in a very strange dark suit, which is slightly camouflaged with no socks or shoes on, laughing hysterically to themselves, completely oblivious to the fact that I'm there. Needless to say, I didn't go to the bathroom again that night. I have no idea why they were there or what they were doing. Now, I'm somebody who used to work as a park ranger, so I'm never too worried when I'm out in the middle of the woods or the middle of nowhere, but I've recently started up a new hobby, which is caving. Now I know this is extremely dangerous, but I'd spent a lot of time in the wilderness, so I felt fairly confident doing this. I had a friend of mine who would always go caving with me, but on this one particular day, I decided to go alone. Now I knew this particular cave system fairly well, so I was never too worried. The thing that I really hated and that would actually get to me is sometimes there would be little bugs and insects in there. And I'm not gonna lie, these absolutely terrified me. I'm embarrassed, but I'll admit it, there's something really scary about feeling one of those things crawling across you and you don't know exactly where it's coming from. But I'm digressing now from my story. Now, while I'm doing the hike to get over to the cave, I'm actually in quite a good mood, but I have a strange feeling in my gut that something is off and I shouldn't really be doing this. I guess it's because it's one of the first times that I've ever done this on my own, but the adrenaline and excitement slowly takes over, so I continue on. Now I eventually make it to the mouth of the cave and honestly it's beautiful. It's one of the best cave-in systems that I've ever seen and have the pleasure of exploring. Now I have a relatively good idea of where I'm going. I quickly check over all my supplies and I have everything, so I'm feeling pretty safe and confident to go ahead. Now, I hear a strange sound outside of the cave that I've not heard before. It sounds like an injured or wounded fox. I'm just glad it's not actually inside the cave. It's definitely not a mountain lion, but it sounds weird to say the least. Now, I slowly make my way into the cave and it starts off very wide and open. Now, if you haven't been in a cave before, you have to constantly check your bearings because it's extremely difficult to know where you're going. And of course, you don't always know whether you're going to get lost or not, so this is actually a really big part of it, is being careful to track where you're going. Now, I actually decided to use a line so I'd know where to go in the cave, which is something you can do, but to be honest, doesn't always work. Ever heard the story about the breadcrumbs? Well, this is similar. Because you can leave a trail with breadcrumbs and they'll be eaten and you won't know where you've come from. The same here. It easily snags on rocks and things, but at this point in my journey, I haven't got to worry about using it because I can still see exactly where I've come from. Now, honestly, this place is absolutely beautiful. I'm lucky I've got my flashlight because I wouldn't be able to see it otherwise, as it's completely pitch black as I continue forward. There's really big stalagmites in here too. I know some people break them off sometimes, but this is actually quite dangerous because it can disturb some of the other ones surrounding you. And that makes them very weak, so you never know, one could fall on you one day and take your eye out if it's big enough. I shine my torch upwards and it's absolutely beautiful. The ceiling's absolutely covered in these things. I can see some movement up ahead. I'm not sure whether it's my eyes playing tricks on me, but I just continue forward. Now, another thing you have to be careful of is hydration levels, because yeah, I know it's cold, but that doesn't mean you won't get dehydrated, especially if you're moving a lot inside the cave. Now, I decided to take a second just to calm my breath down because you don't want to be breathing too heavily when you're exploring caves. So I do some slow and deep breaths. As I'm doing so, I decide to turn my torch off for just a second so I can really feel at peace. I then start taking in very slow breaths, and I actually feel really nice doing so. At the time I'm using my smartwatch to guide me, but I soon decide to turn it off again to preserve the battery. I decide to tie my line up to a rock ahead just so it doesn't become tethered, if that makes sense, because I can kind of keep it out of the way of other things and I really don't want this thing dragging on the floor. Now my line's a really nice yellow colour, so I should be able to see it relatively easily. I come up to a slow bend and I can no longer see any light except for my headlight or my torch in my hand. I'm trying not to use too much power on either because yeah, you bring reserve ones, but you never want to run out of electricity on these things. Now I eventually make it past the first section of the cave and I have to go down into a much deeper section now. This part is actually quite dangerous because all of the large rocks and boulders in front of me. I'm not joking, if you twist your ankle on one of these things you're going to have a nightmare trying to get back. Also, some of the rocks are actually quite sharp and God knows what would happen if you ended up bleeding under here. The other danger too is if there are any predators or let's say mountain lions that actually live there, They would have a great time finding you like this. But anyway, I continue downwards and eventually I come up to a large opening in the cave. Again, this part's beautiful and there's more stalagmites, and I am very careful not to break any off. Just as I'm passing one section, one does fall off behind me where I've come from. I think this is odd, and maybe I've actually caught one on my tether, and I make note to be more careful to myself. The part of the cave I'm coming up to is roughly the halfway point now. I stop to drink my water again and decide to leave my torch on this time. There's no point letting my eyes adjust to the darkness because I literally can't see a thing. I'm actually really at peace, but for some reason, I'm suddenly set by fear. I wouldn't say it was a panic, but it's just a really weird feeling. This is something I've not really experienced before, but I think it's just from being on my own in the cave-in system. Normally I have my friend to accompany me and talk to me and make sure I don't get lost, but not having that kind of made me feel uneasy. Also, there's a strange scratching sound that I can't really explain coming from one of the corners. I realise that the cave goes off to the left and there's a section that I can't actually explore from where I am, and this is where the strange scraping sound is coming from. I'm pretty sure this is just a small animal that's followed me in here looking for food and probably got lost, but they should know the nature better than me, so this shouldn't be the case. And I'm pleased to tell you I was too scared to actually figure out exactly what this thing is. I continue going forward and I have to crouch under a section as the cave goes lower now. Now, if any of you have ever done caving before, you're pretty surely not claustrophobic. Now, I'm someone who can very occasionally become claustrophobic, but with breathing techniques I can actually offset this. So I'm coming up to a much tighter section of the cave and I notice it's odd how the colours of the rocks are changing. And as I'm crawling through one section, I realise I have very limited space to move forward. I seem to be making far too much sound too, and I think that my tether's become snagged. I stop for a section to figure out exactly what's making this sound, because surely I'm not this loud. I stop for a moment and I hear a rustling behind me. I'm now at a point where I actually can't turn around, I have to keep going forward, and by God, there is definitely something behind me. Yes, it's small, but it's making rustling sounds and I have no way to see what it is. I try and remain calm as best as I possibly can and continue going forward. I have to continue here for about another 5 or so minutes before I can safely come out to another opening and finally see what's behind me. It's not very far to go through, but if I start breathing quick or rushing, my chest is going to expand and I could easily become stuck here. As I enter another section of the cave, I see a strange statue-like rock in the middle. I wouldn't call it a statue, but it almost appears as though it's been carved, and it looks kind of beautiful but almost out of place and is really odd. I'm finally at the clearing and I look behind me and see nothing. I pull on my tether and my heart drops. It's loose. I continue pulling and realise I have to stop. My tether has come undone by itself or snapped off, but as long as I don't pull too much of it, I should be able to find my way back if I need. But I can bet any money that anybody else in that situation would not want to go back where I come from with the strange sounds I was hearing, so I continue onwards. I'm probably now about 3/4 into the cave and almost on my return loop. I'm sure that someone else is exploring the cave though, because every so often I certainly see some kind of movement. I decide to call out and I'm met with nothing other than my echoes, which is kind of nice really. I'm convinced someone else is just playing games on me in here, but I have a really weird feeling this time. Now, this isn't as dangerous as underwater cave diving because you haven't got to worry about running out of air, but you do have to be very careful of getting lost exactly the same or injuries. But there's not as much time pressure as underwater cave diving. Now I see a large section that I haven't seen before. That seems unmarked on the map, but I'm sure is a shortcut to get to the section I want to go to, the home stretch. I decide that I'm going to be brave this time and jump down. As I jump, in a split second I realise that this is actually a far bigger drop than the one I was thinking of before. For a moment I think this is it. I've jumped into a deep crevasse and it's all over. Seconds later, pain gives me a harsh reminder that I'm alive but in a bad situation, and worse as I hear a snapping sound. I scream out in pain as I've just jumped down and probably broke both of my ankles. I quickly wiggle my toes around and I can still move them, which is actually really reassuring. God, I've been so stupid. What am I doing here? I should never have come out here on my own. Nobody really knows I'm out here. And how am I going to get out of here? What started out as a simple cave exploration has become a life or death situation now. Maybe it was from the fear of being followed, but I should never have took this shortcut. I start trying to climb out of the sides of where I am, but I realise I can't climb much higher. The sides are just too steep, and I can't use my tether line. God damn, I realise half of the lines actually come down with me, so I can't use it to get back. I realise I'm in a predicament now. I can either try and use the line to figure out where I've come from, or try and climb out. I soon realise that it's just a badly sprained ankle and I should be okay. I quickly pull on all of the rope until eventually it comes back to me. Something feels different this time though. As I'm holding it in my hands, I realise that the rope is far shorter than it should have been. It's a pretty thick rope too, so it shouldn't have come off like that. I ended up pulling the rest of the rope towards me and the line is cut. This was definitely not by a rock because it's a slice and not a tear. I then hear almost footsteps above me. I decide to remain completely silent and turn off my headlamp. I waited here for... well, I can't tell you how long that is because I have no real sense of time and my panic, but it was probably a good 10 minutes. I decide to take some more water and slowly try and climb out. I decide to triple up on the rope, loop it onto a rock above and just pray to God that it doesn't become loose, and I slowly, step by step, drag myself out of there. I can't explain to you how relieved I felt when I eventually made it out of that part of the cave, onto flat ground again. A mental note to myself, never do anything as stupid as that again. And damn, I've lost my flashlight. I've left it where I come from. I laughed to myself for a second and realised I'm never going to get that back again. And I was a bit annoyed because this wasn't really a cheap one. Now I'm only down to my headlamp too for light guidance. I can tell you right now, I do not want to feel my way out of this cave, and it's something that I'm not going to let happen. I eventually find roughly where I should be and continue onwards, but I suddenly realise something's just way too off. Yeah, a sharp bit of rock could have easily cut my rope, but it just seems too perfect, and the noises, they're definitely following me. At first I was convinced that it was actually my guideline that was dragging along with me, but I'm not so sure now. I'm not too worried because I'm pretty sure I know the rest of the way just off memory and I don't need to use the tow line. But God, all safety's gone out of the window at this point. I continue moving forward and I get sudden belches of pain in my ankle. Honestly, the pain was virtually unbearable, and with every step I took that was misplaced, it would put unbearable pain onto my right leg. I even still have a lump there today from this. I go to where I think is where the start of the cave should be, but nothing. I turn off my headlight really quick, hoping to see some light, but nothing. I turn around and my arms and legs feel really heavy suddenly. My breathing starts to pick up rapidly. I don't know where I am. I don't have many supplies to get out of here, but I know something's wrong. I know that if my headlight goes off, I can definitely feel my way out of here, but is that something I really want to put into practice now? I start to panic and do something stupid. I start limping very quickly in any direction, frantically trying to get out of here. But I stop myself. If I fall into another one of these crevasse things, I might not make it out again and have to go much slower. I quickly glance down at the map and I think I know which way I'm going now, and I do see a bolt of light ahead. Surely this is the way out. I turn off my headlights again and I see some kind of torchlight coming up ahead. I'm sure this is a piece of light piercing through the eternal inkiness of where I am, and I happily head towards it. But this was good until it wasn't. I turn on the light again and realise I'm at a dead end. That light was not coming from outside. It looks like it's my torch, but how could it be? I left that in the crevasse. I look up to the ceiling and this part of the cave is actually really beautiful with red and gold colouring, or more yellow, but you get the point. I start to calm down again as I think I know where I am. I head around where the dead end is and again I'm met by only darkness. I'm actually travelling a bit lighter now because I don't have my torch with me and the battery is attached to the side of it, and just up ahead of me I can see some light. I know this is the way out now. Again I start running, but my ankle gives way. I'm on the floor now and feel like I can't move. I'm not sure whether both my ankles are injured or whether my hip's gone because I just feel pain up the whole right side of my body. Now, I believe that I had originally sprained my ankle and potentially fractured it at this point because walking was unbearable and I had to crawl now. I lay on my back for a second due to exhaustion and I hear the sounds again. It sounds just like somebody was following me, but nobody was there. I look to my right and I can see the beautiful limelight from the sun. I know the way back now. I can see the entrance, so I slowly make my way up towards this. Now, it might have only been about 100 meters or so, but trust me, when you're crawling on your belly trying to do this, going over sharp rocks, this is hell. I've actually cut my hands a bit now, and I'm worried that maybe there's a creature that's followed me into the cave. I can see strange bolts of light though up ahead. It's something that I've never really seen before. It's almost like small lightning strikes at the front of the cave that go for a second then vanish. I presume maybe I've just got some kind of concussive injury and that's why I'm seeing the bolts of light, but it doesn't really make sense because it actually illuminates parts of the cave that I can't see without my headlamp. I eventually continue forward and make it out to the lightness of the cave, and I just lay there, so happy I've made it. I lay my head back and actually pray grace that God's protected me and helped me get out of this cave, and I vow never ever to go exploring the cave again on my own. I drink the rest of my water supply in celebration, but my good feelings are short-lived as I've realised how far I'm going to have to go still to get help. As I lay my head back, I hear a strange screechy sound coming from in the cave. It's almost like a half-human sound, but not. I tell myself maybe my torch has just exploded or maybe the battery went weird, but something tells me this is much different. I managed to find a large stick from one of the trees nearby and can actually make my movements much quicker now, and I continue going forwards. As I'm doing so, I can't shake the feeling that something about this whole situation has just been off. I eventually make it to my backpack too and get all of my things and stop to eat for a while. Now annoyingly for me, I'm so injured that I have to camp for the day. I decide not to call in for any help because, well, I'm a bit stupid sometimes, but also because I don't want to say how stupid I've been to other people, and then I'll be okay. Now when I fell asleep that night, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened earlier in the day, and how rough everything had felt to me at the time. I knew I should never have been in that cave on my own, but I was sure things weren't adding up correctly. Someone had definitely cut my line with something, and I'm not sure whether it is an animal. I eventually fell asleep without anything occurring, and eventually made it back home. I reported my injury as a hiking one, and a few months later I ended up returning to work. I never did tell any of the rangers about what had happened because I knew I could probably lose my job or they would say I was insane. But I just can't stop thinking about what happened that day. Needless to say, I never ever decided to go cave exploring on my own again. And I barely did, only a few other times with my buddy, but these were very few and far in between experiences. I want to know what you guys think. For the life of me, I cannot explain what happened that day. I'm not going to say it's paranormal, but it definitely couldn't have been a person because there's no way somebody could have followed me that deep into the cave and knew exactly where they needed to go to and made it out safely again. The explosive or screechy sound I heard too just doesn't make sense. I'd love to say it was definitely my torch, but I can't be sure. And why was my line severed? Why did I feel like I was being followed? Maybe if I was never able to make it out of that pit I fell into, I probably would have found out. Now, I'm not exactly what you guys on here would call a park ranger, but it's basically the equivalent in the country that I live. I have a couple of stories for you today. Now, the first is actually from my childhood, one from when I was younger than I am now. My father really liked to go out on adventures with myself and my brother, and he always planned really cool stuff for us to do. One of these trips involved us going out into the woods and going out camping together. Now, this was really interesting for us, and we'd never been out in the snow before like this, so of course it would bring new challenges, but it would also bring some new adventure. My other brother at the time didn't bother accompanying us, so it's just me and my dad, but I didn't mind it that way. Sometimes I find that my brother can be a bit self-indulged and only really listen or talk about himself and not really give you good advice back. It's quite annoying because I always seem to give him the bestest advice that I possibly could, but that didn't matter, at least not on this trip. Now, we basically planned to go out into the woods for a good couple of days, camping and hiking along the way, and this was brilliant for me as I love to go outdoors. Now, we drove up to the area that we needed and we set out. We were following the main path and had a designated site that we were going to go camping in. My dad did this for safety reasons, as of course his son was with him and he didn't want to be too far away from everyone. When we set out, the snow was no longer falling, but there was a lot of snow around and snow on the trees, so that just meant you had to be a little bit careful when you were walking, because it wasn't always clear whether the ground was kind of like a dry snow or a wet snow, and if it's sort of soggy you can easily get your shoes wet and you have to pretty much head back if that happens. So being relatively careful, we set out. At first we're walking through some relatively low bushes and quite big trees. They're kind of like the tall skinny kind, if you know what I mean. They're basically really beautiful, and I'm really having a good time on the first part of my adventure with my dad. I absolutely love to go on trips like this with my father. He's really one of my best friends, so I was having a great time. The trees eventually become more dense and some of the snow is falling off of the trees and hitting us on the head, and it's a little bit annoying because you have to keep brushing your hat just to try and keep dry. But it's fine, and again adds to some of the adventure. Now, we hike for quite a while and eventually make it out to the spot that we're going to camp in. The snow has actually picked up a little bit and my dad sets to work, and he made me help with the tent, not only to learn the importance of it but also because it's important for staying warm. Now, one thing I was really looking forward to, and my dad especially, was the night sky. We were going to see some beautiful stars out here because we're far away from most populations and miles away from worrying about light pollution. It's something I hadn't really experienced before living in a populated city, so this was a treat. We eventually get up the tent and go inside for a while, and my dad then starts a fire. It doesn't take him too long because he has all the appropriate equipment with him, but he's very cautious to make sure the fire's going nice and strong. He has plenty of firewood around, so this is really good, and I know it's going to be more than enough to keep us warm. The fire eventually melts some of the snow around where we are, and it makes it very warm, so I'm really grateful for this. We sit there talking about different stories, and my dad said, "Hey, look up at the stars, you never know if you're going to see a shooting star." And unfortunately I didn't see any that night, but that's no worries whatsoever. I'm just really glad to be out here and have some bonding time with my father. So the first night goes as planned and everything's good, and we actually have a small heater in the tent, so we're really warm and toasty. We wake up the next day and everything's as normal. We set out where we're going to hike a little bit further for the day and see some of the views that are around. And this place is really beautiful. The hills kind of look a bit mountainy, and again it's something that's a relatively new experience for me, so I'm really excited to see it all. So we set out further and further and get to a point where my dad says that we need to head back just in case we get lost, and I completely understood. Now while there, my dad can hear what sounds like a wolf howling. It seems to be a lone one, but it really frightens my dad. Seeing my father scared actually scares me a lot too. He said, "Son, we better head back." He didn't have to explain to me why it was, and I was pretty glad to be heading back now. I didn't actually hear too much, to be honest, at the time of the wolves. It was more my dad picked up on it, and I guess I kind of noticed, but not really. But it was pretty creepy. So we continue our hike and eventually make it back to the camp, and my dad once again gets a fire going. We cook some food over the fire, and again we're just having a really good time basically, and we decide that we're going to head in for the night. Now throughout the night we can definitely hear some kind of animal howling. Now I know this might sound weird, but I really don't know what animal this was. I realised too my dad seemed relatively unsure of exactly what this was, and again it kind of worried me. I was very worried about wolves coming to get me, even though that realistically it's quite unlikely that it would ever happen. Especially not with the way that we're armed, but I don't know. It's just something kind of creepy that you don't really experience often in life unless you're in those kind of situations where you're in the middle of nowhere like that. So anyway, we ended up falling asleep after not too long and waking up again in the night to realise that the fire's been put out. "That's really odd," my dad says. "Did you leave any water around?" I say no, of course not. And my dad looks a little bit worried and confused. We definitely had the fire going and more than enough wood in it, but it seems to have gone out almost. It looks like somebody's done it on purpose, but we're pretty sure this is some kind of accident, and maybe I left water next to it that got knocked over. Not to worry. We head out again for another day of adventuring. Now on this particular day, we did some more hiking and sightseeing, and we actually tried to do some ice fishing, which I can tell you was pretty unsuccessful. So we start heading back to the tent on the way home. As we get back to the tent, it's pretty much the same thing again. We basically put everything away and get the fire going, cook some food, then settle in for the night. Now I'm awoken at some point in the night, confused as to why I can see my dad outside. I can just about see the silhouette that's portraying a shadow onto the tent. I don't think much of it and fall asleep again, thinking maybe my dad's just went out to use the toilet, or maybe he's worried about the fire. The following morning I woke up and I said to my dad, "Dad, what were you doing last night?" He says, "What do you mean?" "I wasn't doing anything." I say, "Yeah, what were you doing to the fire outside?" And now suddenly my dad looks really concerned. He looks at me and says, "No son, I've been here the whole time. What happened?" And I explain what happened, and he seems somewhat worried. He says, son, it was probably just something in your imagination, so try not to worry about it too much, but worry me it did. I don't really see my dad too scared often, but there was definitely something off. I had certainly seen somebody the previous night. I don't know, maybe it's just where I wasn't used to being out there and I was a little bit uncomfortable and I was just imagining things. But this was pretty creepy to say the very least. So anyway, we set out once again and everything's as normal like usual. As we set out, we've basically come into one of our last days and we're just having a normal conversation as usual. While we're there, we stop and we can see somebody up on the ridgeline just further away from where we are. It's quite hard to see, but they seem to have a really large brownie colour coat on, which is really odd. We wave and say hello, but there's no reply. My dad seems to get a little bit concerned at this and tells me that we need to head back now. So, a little bit bored now, we're just sitting there with the fire going, making food, not really saying anything. And my dad seems more worried than before. He says he's going to investigate something and not to worry, and I say okay, and wait for my dad to return 4 or 5 minutes later, which he does. I say, Dad, what happened? And he says nothing, just get ready for sleep. My dad gets the fire going even stronger, and we settle in for the night. We fall asleep and wake up the next morning to realise that the fires went out once again. Definitely by water, which is really bizarre. It can't have possibly been from the snow or the trees because there wasn't much around there, especially not in the spot that we're in. But how did it go out? This is really bizarre. Now we get our things together and head out for the final day's adventure. We once again go to do some lake fishing and really want to try and get some fish this time because it's something I haven't really experienced many other times and I've never caught anything fishing. And my dad loves fishing, so he keeps on and on going on about it, but I tell him how boring it can be, but he will not listen. His father also did fishing too, so that's definitely why he liked it so much. So we surprisingly actually catch one single tiny fish, and I joked to my dad about it, but he's eager for us to get it back to our campsite and put it on the fire. And that's exactly what we do. So we make it all the way back again, and we start the fire, and everything's as normal. We eat the fish, then we decide that we should just start heading home the next morning earlier than usual because we're both a bit bored now, which is completely fine. As we're sitting there, just roasting some food over the fire, we can see a strange figure once again, just off in the distance. It's a silhouette of a person wearing some kind of coat which kind of looks like a very dark colour against the background, but this is basically just because of how dark it is now. Now the stars look absolutely beautiful at this point, but they're not really casting enough light down on us for us to be able to see well. But it's definitely a person there. I joked to my dad saying it's probably a snowman, but my dad doesn't really seem to be in the mood for jokes. He then says hey, and shouts out hey again and waves, but there's no reply. That's when my dad says that he's going to investigate a little bit, and I trail slowly behind him. We can see whatever this figure is holding up some kind of stick to the sky. Now what's really weird in this moment is we both realise the clothes that this person's wearing. The clothes do not look like somebody that's from the 21st century. They look very primitive, and all of his clothes are from some kind of animal hides. And how he wasn't cold, I'll never know, because we were cold enough with our new high-tech gear on, but this was really weird. It looked like somebody coming from a fancy dress or costume shop, if you guys call it that. But why would he be out here like this? Again, we called out, but we don't get any reply whatsoever, and we probably get about 40 or so feet from him, and we can see that this is a much older man just staring at us, still holding up some kind of stick into the air. That's when my dad turns around and says, "Son, you know what to do." And I did. I didn't need any further instructions as we start trudging back through the snow again. My dad's holding my hand, and he won't take his eyes off of this person. He says, "Son, do not take your eyes off of him. If he moves 1 inch, tell me." And I start to panic a little bit and start putting everything away. I eventually do so, and that figure is still there, having only moved very slightly. We get everything together and I tell my dad, and he says it's time to go. My dad doesn't even bother putting out the fire, and we start the slow trek back with only our torches to guide us. Luckily there's enough light on the ground from the snow illuminated for us to be able to see where we're going, and we start the trek back. While walking, I keep looking over periodically, and that guy is still there, barely moving, until eventually he turns away into the woods. This makes us pick up our pace a little bit because we can't really see what direction he's going in, and I kid you not, we can hear the sounds of wolves once again. My dad still has his lights on because he thinks it's probably going to scare the wolves a bit, and he has his weapon ready. Luckily we make it back to the car and everything's uneventful at this point. We quickly get into the car, wait for a good 5 or 10 minutes, which has got to be the most terrifying part, while he's able to get the engine going and the car ready to drive. During these moments my dad tells me, "Please tell me if you see anything, son," and I promise him, and we have the doors locked. My dad still has his weapon in hand at this point, and thank God the car comes to life. My dad slowly turns it round and gets the car onto the road, and we start making the way back home. I say, Dad, what did you see?" And my dad tells me whatever he saw was definitely not a person. He then reveals to me that when he went off earlier in the day and before, he had seen the exact same figure that looked terribly dated and out of place for the situation they are in. He said it almost looks like he's bumped into some kind of time traveler, or we've bumped into them. We are both very scared by this experience, and my dad made me promise that I wouldn't say anything to my mum because he knew that she would never let us out there again. Now, we never did go back to there ever again afterwards. Looking back on it now and speaking to him more recently, he's revealed to me how scared he was at the time, and that he didn't want to show me how scared he was at the time, but he was really feeling it. Now, I'm certain we bumped into some kind of weird spirit there that we weren't really supposed to see, and we were trespassing on their land and they were not happy about it. It still remains one of the weirdest experiences of my life. Now, I've always thought I had some kind of connection with the paranormal, whether I wanted it or not, and one of those actually come from being on site during my job. Now, as part of my job, I had to go every so often to check out some environmental thing. I won't bore you with the details, but I had to check markers at certain points. Mind you, this is well into my adult life, so I wasn't as scared being out in the forest or parts of it relatively isolated from others. I always had the help of the other people working the same job as me, but it would take them a while to get there. But luckily we had our radios to stay into contact with each other, and this always made me feel a lot more safe than not. Now, I was on my way to one of these specific markers, and as I'm walking, I stopped dead in my tracks. Just in the misty October air above where I'm standing, I can see some people over the hill. Now, once again, this is just like what happened when I was younger with my dad, so I had some paranoia from it, and I decided it'd be best for me to stay out of sight and not necessarily investigate immediately. I quickly come off of the main road that I'm on, and face away from the sun and quickly go into the woods a bit. I stand so that I'm parallel with one of the trees, and just sort of out of sight. I wait for a good 4 minutes and nothing happens, but something was telling me do not move, and wait and see what happens, and that was just what I did. After another good 5 or 10 minutes of this, I eventually see more figures coming up the road. They get closer and closer, and they seem to be armed, causing me to duck down a little bit. Because of the mist, I can't really see exactly who they are or what they're wearing, but they eventually come closer and closer, and I think maybe there's some people lost from a party because they're carrying some kind of big swords and have weird shaped helmets on them and long beards. They get a little bit closer and I can see that what they're wearing is armor and animal clothing. I immediately have flashbacks to what me and my father saw that time. I then realise these look like warriors from a prehistoric time. But the strangest part is I can't see anything below their knees. It's almost like they're hovering through the ground, which is the strangest part. At first I'm convinced that maybe this is just from the mist and it's kind of obstructing them, but then I realise it's not the case. Literally, it's like they're walking through the ground, which makes me realise these aren't real people. There's probably about 7 or 8 of them in total, and they don't take notice of me because where I am, and my god, I'm too scared to make it known. I wait for a couple of seconds and look around, just to see if there's any others I have to worry about. Now they're in absolute silence at this point. I turn back and they've vanished. Literally like they didn't exist in the first place. Now the craziest thing about this is there would have been no possible way they could have hidden in that time. So I know something was definitely up. Now after this experience, I immediately went back home and told my dad after my shift what had happened. I didn't tell any of the other workers initially because I didn't want them to think I was off my head, but my dad said, "Son, where was this?" And I explained the exact location, and he then revealed to me something that I couldn't believe. The path that I was standing on was once a medieval road that was discovered not too long ago and was buried about 2 or so feet beneath the path that had been laid more recently. So that would have made perfect sense as to why I couldn't see from their knees below, which is exactly what I saw. I think that maybe I have some kind of connection to the spiritual world, where I can see moments in time that others can't. Now, I haven't told any of my colleagues about what happened in this story per se because, I can't really be bothered with too many questions. If this had have happened and my dad didn't tell me that about the road before, I wouldn't have really questioned it, but knowing this, I can only possibly believe that it was paranormal.